but there we go. So again, I'd like to first welcome the presenters, Andrea Lee and Adam Werdenberg, as well as Katie Porter, who we're very fortunate is joining us from Hamilton Health Sciences. So maybe Andrea, could you kick us off and sort of quickly introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrea Lee. I am the Research Development and Innovation Officer at Hamilton Health Sciences. My role is largely to help facilitate these types of conversations, be a touch point in terms of how to access our fairly large research and academic hospital, and really help to facilitate and accelerate, innovation within health technology. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today.
Excellent, thank you. And maybe Katie, also from Hamilton Health Sciences.
Sure. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Katie Porter, Director of Research Administration at Hamilton Health Sciences. As you know, we are a large academic hospital network, and the research administration team includes many different functions that support all that work: contracts, ethics, business development. And we're very pleased to be here today to learn more about these companies and tell you a little bit more about how you can work with us at Hamilton Health Sciences.
Thank you very much, Katie. Adam, can you do a brief introduction?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My camera is just off temporarily. I will be joining you visually in a moment. My name is Adam Werdenberg. I am the Research Quality Assurance Officer at the Research Institute of St. Joe's Hamilton, which is affiliated with St. Joseph's Healthcare Hamilton. My role is essentially to make sure that all clinical research studies that are being done at the hospital are being done according to the rules and regulations. So I'm looking forward to talking with everybody today.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And one sentence of just kind of brief context for all those in attendance. Hamilton Health Sciences and St. Joseph's Healthcare are the two major research hospitals that are in Hamilton, Ontario. And together they provide all acute care in the region, as well as to a surrounding sort of catchment area of almost 2 million people in Ontario, which is one of the states in Canada. So what I'd like to do now is to just go through and would invite each of the participants to do a very brief introduction. So no more than kind of 10 or 15 seconds, just who you are, your position, and maybe a sentence on the nature of your venture, your company. Could we start maybe with Norsk Telemedicine, Vidar?
Yes, hello. Sorry, I didn't get you. It was a bit bad connection. Can you just repeat what you just said, please?
Sure, Vidar. I was wondering if you could just spend 10 or 15 seconds introducing yourself and Norsk Telemedicine.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. My name is Vidar Arnulf, and I'm the managing director, CEO of the company. I'm an anesthesiologist by trade. I've been working on developing a lot of companies over the last couple of years. Norsk Telemedicine is about one big idea, and that is that the hospitals of tomorrow will be in people's bedrooms. So it is about trying to get technology to be easy to use, and at the same time will be useful for practitioners and for hospitals. So what we do is three things: we identify conditions, we will be able to predict deteriorations, and by doing so, we will also hopefully be able to help preventing disease.
Fantastic.
So that's the company, and we use technology for that.
Thank you very much. So perhaps Ann-Kristin from Bar Health, and please apologize. My apologies for any mispronunciations.
No problem. That was quite well, actually. My name is Ann-Kristin Rotegaard. I'm a nurse. I have a PhD in nursing science, and I'm the manager of VAR Healthcare. I'm also the chair of EMEA NI, International Medical Informatics Association for Nursing Special Interest Group. What we deliver is an evidence-based decision support tool for nurses, consisting of procedures, knowledge summaries, knowledge tests, calculators, and yeah, a bit more.
Excellent. No, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I don't know, did we have Geir from Dossier? Were you able to join, or are we still? We may skip over.
I think he's not here yet.
Okay. How about Bjorn Olaf from Amatis?
Yeah, hello. Okay, still Bjorn Olaf, working for Amatis. I'm a sales and business development, and Amatis provide a platform for a wide range of solutions and features. These are done by journey board, whiteboards, and mobile apps. And we do that to improve the patient safety, patient journey, and patient pathway. Yeah, supporting the patient logistics, clinical logistics, and service logistics. We have been in the market for 15 years, so we are not a startup set of.
Excellent. Well, we welcome all types. There's all sorts of reasons why one might want to engage. Could we have Ota or Odd Inge from Checkware?
Hello, everybody. My name is Otto, and I work with international sales for Checkware, which is a Norwegian software company that has a solution, a digital platform for copyrighted clinical assessments. So with one solution, all clinical assessments used at a hospital can be covered.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And then Astrid from ASAP Norway.
Yes, hello. Astrid Skreosen. Can you hear me? Yeah.
We can.
Yeah, we are producer of, and I am the founder of ASAP Norway, and we are producer of infection sheets. And the corona changed a lot of things in our company, and we are starting to produce environment-friendly gowns. So we got a very big agreement with the health system, Norwegian health system, and deliver 600,000 gowns for the corona situation in the beginning of the corona. And we are now going to set up a full automatically production line, and we'll go forward with the production of disposable environment-friendly gowns beside of our regular production of infection sheets for stretchers and emergency.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Next, we have Geir, and I think also Finn. I saw Finn was here from SoftOX.
Yes, my name is Geir Almos. I'm from SoftOX. I'm here together with my colleagues, Hans-Jørgen, Finn, and Aisha. We have developed a new antimicrobial solution for removing of infections and prevention of infections. We are going to market with the hand disinfectants these days, which is more skin friendly and more efficient hand disinfection than today's solutions. At the same time, we also develop an antimicrobial solution for wound care and also inhalation purposes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And then we have Michael from EpiGuard.
Hey, good morning. My name is Michael. I'm the Vice President for Sales and Marketing in EpiGuard. And we make the EpiShuttle transport isolation system. Basically, it's a single patient transport isolator, so you can safely transport patients with contagious disease without risk of infection of healthcare personnel, or transport of vulnerable patients and protect them from a dangerous world around them. We are in the Canadian market already to some extent, but want to be more. Thank you.
Fantastic. And then Ian from Smart Crowding, I think, will be joining a little bit later. And so when he arrives, we'll make him do an introduction to everyone. Perhaps maybe also a little dance. We're also joined and we're very honored to have Andres from the Royal Norwegian Embassy in Ottawa, who, along with Lori from Innovation Norway, was really sort of the driving force behind making this afternoon presentation possible. So thank you very much, both for your support and also for being here. I don't know, Lori or Andres, if either of you want to say anything. Certainly you can.
Maybe I could just thank Hamilton Health Sciences and Synapse and St. Joseph Hospital for being fantastic partners and being really proactive in wanting to work with us and Innovation Norway and the Norwegian Embassy and the clusters in Norway. So thank you to all of you for spending 3.5 hours with us today.
Well, certainly our pleasure. And I think also what's nice is building on past relationships and work that's been done. So that's so it's good to keep this good, healthy, and strong relationship going. We also have a few guests. So representatives from the Norwegian Smart Care Cluster, from Norway Health Tech, and also from Metamor Health. Ahid and Teresa will be joining from the Norwegian Smart Care Cluster. Trine from Norway Health Tech, and Martin from Metamor. All three of these are organizations that I think, in some way or capacity, you have interacted with or will soon be interacting with. So with that, I'm going to. I guess I realized that I skipped right over introducing myself. So I'm the director of the Synapse Consortium, which is a partnership of life science organizations in the Hamilton region representing about 25,000 employees. The purpose of the consortium is to support the commercialization of health technology by facilitating relationships and collaborations and cooperation between organizations, with particular interest and focus on collaboration between the private sector and the public sector. So that's a little bit about kind of why I'm here, and in effect, what I help do is create lateral connections between organizations, and that may explain a little bit why we're going to kind of kick off the presentation with just a little bit of an explanation of the Hamilton Health ecosystem, so you understand some of the context about, kind of where we and the presenters are coming from. So if you'll bear with me, I'll try to get through this reasonably quickly, and then we can get to Andrea and Hamilton Health Science. So first off, many of you, I'm sure, know where Canada is. Socially, economically, we politically, culturally, we share quite a few common themes and threads with Norway, and Hamilton, as kind of evidenced by where this big pin is here, it sort of goes down here, sits right in the center of the economic heart of Canada, which is Southern Ontario. We're about 60 kilometers south of Toronto, and about 100 kilometers from the border with the United States. And so we sit at the fulcrum between much of the kind of the industrial manufacturing heartland of the of Canada. In terms of concentration of health workers, we're actually amongst the highest in Canada, in no small part because of the two very large research hospitals that we have that are represented here, as well as a fairly extensive and robust network of family care and long-term care facilities that provide support and care to the population in the Hamilton region. When we talk about our cluster, our ecosystem in Hamilton, we first start and think about companies such as yours. And so we have medical device companies, we've got research testing labs, we've got digital health companies, and we have some pharmaceutical and drug manufacturers. But when we really think about the cluster, For us, it's very important that we think not only just the companies that are producing medical devices or digital health products, but also all of the private sector supporting services. And that's because without those supporting services, it's, we find it very difficult to be able to, or for those companies to be able to succeed and thrive. And so for us, it's very important that we bring them to the table to make sure that they collaborate. And more than that, in addition to sort of the private sector supporting institutions, we also, we understand and think it's incredibly important to have, to bring all of the public sector supporting institutions, whether they be teaching hospitals or specialized research hospitals or research centers and institutes or post-secondary institutions like universities or colleges, as well as kind of government actors. And it's together all of these people who make up a healthy ecosystem. And my suspicion is that if you looked at where you operate in Norway, you will see that you have many of these, if not all of these actors. And it is the interaction and intersection of all of the combined efforts of everyone in the cluster that is going to be one of the key determinants for your success. And so this session today is a little bit about surfacing the hospital and care provider sort of quadrant of the ecosystem, and giving you a little bit more of a sense of what that is like in Hamilton and in Canada more generally, so that as you think about entering or accessing the North American market, you can both leverage that knowledge and also hopefully leverage the connections. These are some statistics about Hamilton. Mostly just it's designed to just say that we're a relatively decent sized community. We have kind of one of everything, whether it's a nuclear reactor to do nuclear medicine, or if it's sort of robotic surgical rooms, etc. I won't dwell on this slide too long, but more just to sort of kind of give you a sense that we've got a little bit of heft in Hamilton, and thus are potentially well positioned to be able to partner with many companies. I referenced during my introduction that I'm the director of the Synapse Consortium. Some of the key actors in the community came together a few years ago to form the Synapse Life Science Consortium. You'll recognize two of the logos because you'll see them a few times during this presentation, but Hamilton Health Sciences and St. Joe's are two of the anchor institutions that make up the Synapse Consortium. But through me, we also have connections, and you can also leverage connections to universities or colleges. We have innovation parks, and others. So I think that's probably enough from me in terms of just kind of a bit of background about kind of Hamilton. And I want to just provide this just to give you again a sense of where it is that the hospitals sit, the context in which they sit, so that you know, and you can recognize that it is not simply a case of engaging with the hospitals, but it's engaging with the hospitals and the broader environment, which allows them to bring other stakeholders to the table to help augment any work that might be done. So with that, there aren't any questions. And again, encourage you all just to kind of put up your hands or interrupt us if you do have questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Andrea and also potentially Katie if she wants to speak as well, to talk about Hamilton Health Sciences. Andrea, over to you.
Great, thank you, Alex. I'm going to give you a little overview of, our institution, Hamilton Health Sciences, which is representative of one, type of Canadian research hospital. So a little bit about us from a clinical operations perspective. Here, you can see sort of a snapshot of our 5, facilities, and then a number of specialty care facilities that are sort of peppered around the city as well. We are Canada's second largest hospital network, and our enterprise services a catchment area or a population of over 2.3 million residents at this point in time. Some of our roles in terms of statistics, we are one of the highest volume cardiac surgery centers. We have a leading leading stroke center, and we're one of the fastest growing children's hospitals in the area. We have a regional trauma center and one of the largest pediatric inpatient mental health units. Our Hamilton General Hospital has one of 2 Ontario burn centers, and we are one of 3 Ontario stem cell transplant centers as well. So again, this was just to give the audience a sense of, sort of the scope and breadth of our organization. We do cover care for our residents from pre-birth really to end of life care. If we go to the next slide, please. In terms of our organizational structure and a little bit about the department that Katie runs, which is research administration, we have research facilities that kind of report up to our department. These are just a sampling of some of them throughout Hamilton. So you may have heard of our Population Health Research Institute. It's a fairly large institute that really focuses primary areas of cardiovascular disease and prevention, arrhythmia, thrombosis and stroke, diabetes, and definitely a focus on global health and epidemiology, lots of global clinical trials that take place at PRTI and with some of our researchers. TARI is our Thrombosis, Cardiac, Stroke, and Pulmonary Embolism Research Institute. Again, with that type of focus. ECRI is our Escarpment Cancer Research Institute, lots of clinical trials in oncology, and of course, a focus on the translational piece of it, in terms of how we can enhance the way we deliver care to our cancer patients. Our Offord Research Institute focuses on child and mental health and neurodevelopment disorders, and a focus on types of treatments and interventions for that patient cohort. And then lastly, our JERIS Center is our research institute that focuses on frailty, aging, and dementia, a focus on, of course, the medical needs of older adults and end-of-life care, and as well a focus on palliative care and medically complex cases. And the JERIS Center is housed in one of our hospitals, St. Peter's Hospital. So it's quite an interesting space where there's sort of research and clinical care all under one roof. Okay, Alex, if we could move on. So a little bit about sort of our stats, I guess, as a bit of a snapshot. I think Alex mentioned this a little bit as well. We have over 450 researchers within our institution, and over 1,500 research staff that are part of that. Again, we're conducting clinical trials globally. So we have over 1,500 sites in 90 different countries around the world, and we are consistently ranked in the top 5 when it comes to sort of research hospitals. As the whole world experienced, because of COVID, we really had to accelerate a lot of our technological sort of offerings. And we call this, sort of a little bit of our revolution. Since the early pandemic, as of last year, these were, some of the statistics that came out. We've conducted over, 74,000 phone visits, 19,000 video calls, definitely a significant and dramatic increase in providing virtual care over having to, see patients on site, and really have conducted over 33,000 virtual visits between healthcare professionals and patients, all of course powered by our wonderful ecosystem, the collaborators and partners, private sector partners, industry partners that have been able to work with us and provide us some technology and innovations to help us pivot and change the way we deliver care. So if we'll move on, I just want to focus a little bit about, sort of the vision for innovation. HHS, sort of really went through a bit of a reform, I suppose, a few years ago when they merged the research and innovation agenda. And really, I think they started to focus more on innovation, research and learning, and has really embedded that as one of the pillars, of our enterprise. So when it comes from if I start off with more of an enterprise vision, that would be, providing best care for all. And in a number of ways, we've really tried to move the needle on that. Pretty recently, we made a landmark agreement to replace and manage our extensive fleet of diagnostic and imaging equipment from an enterprise-wide perspective, really focusing on, enabling these strategic partnerships and having it more of a, instead of more of a transactional relationship, really having a partner to help us with, managing the extensive equipment that we have. Secondly, we, in an effort to be more open and transparent, we have taken steps to post, wait time data, for instance, for, our ED visits, urgent care centers, and I believe our partners at St. Joe's have sort of taken the lead and done the same as well. And one of our biggest and most recent milestones towards clinical transformation is the renewal of our hospital information system. So we are switching to an instance of Epic in the hopes to enable more integrated and patient-centered healthcare using, a very common platform that many world-leading healthcare organizations use. So, what does that mean for, our institution, and what sort of goals are we hoping to achieve? Ultimately, of course, to deliver better health outcomes, on a more efficient basis, on a less of a, acute and reactive basis. Again, building on sort of our transformation agenda, of course, the quadruple aim that, all, I assume most healthcare organizations would, be abiding by, and then supporting, the strategy that we have and the vision that we've sort of laid out. And then thirdly, really focusing on promoting self-management as an essential and active role for our community and patients. And I believe that's really, sort of a shift in thinking when it comes to healthcare organizations. I think to implicate self-management as, an absolutely essential piece of the puzzle will be a way for us to allow our patients and community to feel a little bit more empowered and engaged in their own care. And, we feel, of course, a big enabler of this will be technology through medical device or digital health technologies. And then again, how we can incorporate different stakeholders, our private sector partners, our entrepreneurs, our innovators, who are part of, sort of this ecosystem, and how we can incorporate, their innovations and help us ultimately, give the best care for all. So we can move on to the next slide. In terms of expanding the capacity and realizing sort of the benefits of the program, we really want to leverage some of the research that I spoke about, in some of our research institutes, of course. We have, some really, amazing researchers that are part of our enterprise. And we're hoping to sort of peel that back and say, what are people doing? Are there synergies or alignments? And then can we leverage innovation and technology to expand, the capacity? Of course, our hope is, again, to differentiate HHS as, an innovative system leader to engage, our community. Provide, tangible examples of unique contributions to the Canadian healthcare system. I'll go through, an interesting case study later in the presentation. Again, just to, enhance the way that HHS's reputation and brand, and of course, assist and encourage staff and clinical scientists in the development, of solutions. We really want to help them. We want to build up an innovation infrastructure and ecosystem to allow them to facilitate, creativity and growth and, an interesting application perhaps to a medical problem. So in terms of research development and innovation, which is sort of my role, we're really hoping to support the construction of an innovative ecosystem that can enable the success, again, of these initiatives that I mentioned. The role is really about facilitating collaboration, building alliances, and being that touch point and that liaison between internal colleagues, clinical champions that some innovators might be seeking, with our external suppliers and innovators to expand these capabilities. So these are some of the 6 pillars that I'll go into a little bit that I can describe in the next slide. So in terms of business development and partnerships, which is a large part of the role, the idea is to really strengthen that collaboration between our community, within Hamilton, within Ontario and Canada, but also international partnerships as well, such as yourselves. By remaining up to date with the current landscape, whether it's COVID or sort of other political or social economic changes, we're hoping that we can be in alignment with our strategy and trends in the environment. Networking and relationship building, of course, things like this, this type of workshop, these new connections that we're making help us to build alliances, potentially, hopefully, we'll have some new collaborations that come out of these type of activities. And then, of course, participation in industry events and conferences and things like that as well. A big one for us is the education quality improvement piece. So, having a good sense of what's happening from a research perspective internally, as well as, outside sort of locally, nationally, internationally, will help us to be able to identify areas and priorities within our organization about, where we'd want to take our research. Within research development and innovation, the team is able to help with project management and services of, these types of engagements that we might have, whether it's a clinical trial or a pilot project, things like that. We can provide a little bit of one-on-one support once we have a collaboration established. And then, of course, there's, sort of the knowledge translation piece, having access to a real world clinical setting, of course, is paramount to, understanding and evaluating solutions and seeing whether they work sort of in that kind of real life context. So this is just a little bit about, sort of the ecosystem that we can provide. So if I could drill down a little bit more into the research administration services, this is, again, as we mentioned earlier, Katie's department. We offer sort of the following services. There's research contracts and agreements, research finance, there's development and relations. We're closely affiliated with our research ethics board. So that's called HIRED. We offer services in research compliance and quality assurance. Of course, research development and innovation, which is my department, and then which is a sort of a newly created service called CREATE, which is around data science and digital health support. So this is all research-related activities across the enterprise and sort of our suite of services. So I'll go into a little bit more detail. In terms of research agreements and contracts, of course, the goal is to work collaboratively with our researchers to enable their research goals, to facilitate research by effective and efficient negotiation, to finalize these type of agreements and contracts, and then helping sort of with any of the review process, whether it's internal research contracts between a group of researchers, or more often than not when it's instances where I might be involved or loosely involved, it could be with an innovator or a company. So why do we need contracts? Of course, we want to define the deliverables, make sure everything in terms of obligations and responsibilities and expectations are set out and extremely clear. There's a risk management, perspective as a publicly funded organization. And then again, clarity on the needs of all our parties, particularly when it comes to, publication capacity, ownership of IP, that might be generated through a collaboration or some sort of engagement, and then, use of data and data transfer ability and things like that. So these are all, sort of areas that definitely need to be negotiated and managed, when it comes to a collaboration with HHS. They can also cover contracts when it comes to confidential discussions. We can, easily sort of deploy CDA, data transfer agreements, and then of course, sort of the agreement around, the trial or pilot or whatever the evaluation may be. So, our team, of our research contracts team is, highly sufficient to be able to help with all of those needs. If we go to the next slide, again, that was just sort of covering, types of agreements that, we commonly would use, and the contact, type of information. So moving on to a research finance as a service that we provide, all, research instances, with HHS would require an account to be opened. We need, sign off in terms of authorized signatories who can, approve sort of the coming and goings of the money, any type of invoicing as well as depositing, any payments, use of funds, to pay for certain things, and then again, the closing of the research account as well. So that we have a fairly large team and specialists who handle, all the receivables, all the payables, invoicing, as well as any financial reporting obligations. So, I've worked pretty closely with this team for a number of government-funded, innovation projects where HHS, for instance, might be the academic institution and the entity that's responsible for the financial reporting, and sometimes some of the actual milestones and progress reporting as well. So it can be a large undertaking. And really, the best way for this to work is when there's that close relationship and a good project manager and research coordinators that kind of work hand in hand. So, often these types of funded opportunities by, government or economic development bodies are used for deploying funds to encourage and accelerate these types of research development and commercialization activities. And so it may be some sources that some of you folks might be able to leverage. And we're quite familiar with these types of bodies and these types of grants. So moving on to research development and public relations, we do have a team that helps us to launch about 4 to 5 internal funding opportunities. So within HHS to some of our staff and researchers. Some of them are geared towards early career investigators to help encourage and mentor their sort of research capabilities. Some of our funds are towards healthcare professionals who are interested in leading some research. So these could be, pharmacists, nurse practitioners, just people who don't traditionally maybe take on a research role, but might be interested in implementing something within for their department or ward or hospital. And then as well as some opportunities for scholars at different levels. So funding postdoctoral fellows, residents, and then also graduate and undergraduate level and high school students. So we have a fairly comprehensive program that our manager of research development and public relations run to help us focus on helping our future leaders learn about research and give them the opportunity to observe it and be able to participate in certain settings. Another service that our research administration covers is public affairs and communication. So our researchers are encouraged to share newsworthy stories about their research activities. We have a lovely team that helps us with sort of humanizing these stories, finding creative ways to sort of create storyboards or like create a bit of a story around some of our research successes. We have, a great share page, actually, if I encourage some of you to visit on our website, where, there's stories about different roles within HHS. Some of them are interviewed to be like, a day in the life of a radiologist, an environmental aide, research development innovation officer, et cetera. So you can kind of get a sense of the different roles and the different players and stakeholders within our organization. And really, the team is great about helping us to share our findings and give a digestible sort of means to, creating a way to tell the public about, and the community, about our successes, and they're really able to leverage their connections with social media and with local media coverage as well. So, that's another sort of aspect that we offer. Moving on, a little bit about research compliance and quality. This is really the team there is set up to ensure compliance with regulations and legislation surrounding research practices, making sure that we follow, all our good clinical practices, and then focusing on ensuring that we uphold to that quality. They can help with regulatory training, education for investigators and their staff, and SOP management, so standard operating procedures, regulatory reviews and assessments, and of course some risk monitoring for clinical trials. And they can play an internal auditing role as well when it comes to sort of Health Canada audits. And then of course, there's the research and innovation infrastructure, a little bit more about what, I'm responsible for. And again, that's really about creating and promoting the interests of the ecosystem through, partnerships, through our great relationship we have with Synapse and Alex's work, creating a sustainable environment is very important for us to allow for, this growth. And then, a key point of that I really tried to drive home is, me and my team have a good sense of what type of funding opportunities are out there. And, that's something that we really can't discredit or sort of downplay in terms of the importance of having, that financial support to take on these types of activities. And I'll get into a little bit more of that later on. And then if we go to the next slide, the last service I'd talk about under research registration would be our CREATE team. It's a fairly new entity that we've created, and it's called the Center for Data Science and Digital Health. It was founded to, again, really support these innovation activities, and made up of specialists in health sciences, data engineering, software engineering, with a good mix of a data science team and then a digital health team as well, with their mission to partner with our internal scientists and innovators to invent the future of health. So that's largely to support some of our internal capabilities, but there can be opportunities in a collaboration as well for to leverage some of their expertise. So our data scientists are very skilled in machine learning approaches, deep learning, definitely lots of expertise in applying the data science for a variety of applications. And our digital health team are really specialists in the design, development, and deployment of clinical applications within health. Our solution architects can help deploy large-scale software solutions, and they've done this both within Canada and in the developing world, and are experts in terms of interoperability standards and integration and all of that with other health information systems. So we're quite fortunate to have that that internal capability that we've built out through the vision of our VP of Innovation, Dr. Ted Scott. And then lastly, if we go to the next slide, all of this really, I wanted to summarize was how we essentially support our Hamilton innovation ecosystem. We constantly need to, iterate, but having and leveraging these tight networks between the innovation centers within our internal capabilities and expertise, and our partners will help us to enhance the ecosystem. As I mentioned, and as Alex mentioned, here are some of the great partners within our community that we have, whether it's Mohawk College or McMaster University, the Innovation Park, or even the Hamilton Chamber of Commerce and economic development departments within the city. We really are a tight-knit community with who really look out for each other and have each other's back. So it's really a wonderful environment, I think, for health innovation. And so, I think I've hoped to provide the group with a little bit of context about what a research hospital looks like, some of the service supports that are available within the context of research, a little bit about the ecosystem and infrastructure we're trying to create to stimulate and foster, the environment, and, hopefully to give you a sense of using Hamilton as a soft landing partner to support research and development within health. So I think that's the end of mine. So I'll pass it on to Adam now to speak more about what a collaboration with a research hospital might look like and some considerations you should be aware of before, prior to sort of jumping into the space. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andrea. Before we sort of pass over the torch to Adam, I did want to provide an opportunity for anyone to ask any questions if they wanted to. And while they think about if they have questions, I had just kind of one myself. Do you have a sense of kind of how many projects, collaborative projects you might undertake or HHS might undertake as an entity with private sector companies over the course of a year? Do you have kind of like a rough, I know it varies from year to year, but is that something that just off the top of your head, or maybe I see Katie coming unmuted there, so maybe she might have an idea as well.
Yeah, I'll let Katie comment.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as Andrea said, we have this merged research and innovation agenda at HHS. So certainly lots of collaborations with industry partners at HHS. I feel like that is actually something that distinguishes us from other academic health sciences centers, is that we're quite adept at collaborating with industry. So right now, the split is around kind of 50% research funded by grants and around 50% funded by industry. And that takes all different shapes and forms, including, the types of collaborations that we're talking here about here today. So yeah, I think in terms of being adept at engaging with industry, I think this is something that Hamilton Health Sciences is a bit better at than some of the more traditional academic hospitals here in Canada.
Excellent. And I think that was the point I was really hoping to underline, was just that there's both the experience and the interest in engaging with sort of private sector partners, which sometimes there might be reticence in other hospital environments, but we've really kind of figured out how to do that. And I would just, given the number of digital health digital health companies that are on the call with us, I think that the CREATE team is certainly, Andrea, I was really delighted that you kind of were able to dive into that one, because that I feel is a really interesting and valuable resource that, again, most hospitals don't necessarily have, but is well positioned and in fact oriented towards engaging and providing support for product development or system integration testing or interoperability kind of evaluations. And I think that's just a really neat functional capability that's embedded within the research and innovation group. Are there any sorry if I feel like I filibustered enough there. Are there any questions that people in the audience might have? Oh, Anne-Kristin, looks like you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Andrea, for a very good presentation and overview. I represent a system for nurses. Could you tell a little bit about how is nursing covered within your research areas and what you call projects at a hospital?
Sure, certainly, I'm happy to speak to that. And
yeah,
Andrea,
thank you.
you can jump in, but I will say this is another thing HHS is quite good at, is championing what we would call clinical health professional research, including nurses. We also have a role, the director of clinical health professionals research. So I think that really shows the support for that type of work across HHS. And one of our largest kind of digital health research projects called Smart View. And I think maybe some people on the call have heard about this, but it involves remote monitoring. The investigator for that is a nurse, Dr. Michael McGillian. So certainly lots of support for nursing research across HHS as well.
Great, thank you. And just one more question. I was also interested in, you talked about the renewal of your electronic patient record system, and is decision support and decision support tool for nurses included in that project?
Yes, it is. There are tons of different components in terms of this new EPIC adventure that we're embarking on. So research is at the table representing both research nurses and our researchers to ensure that there's decision support tools embedded in that system, and also access to research data. So we have quite an old health information system here at HHS. So everyone's pretty excited about it. It will launch in June of 2022.
Great, thank you so much.
Finn, it looked like you had raised your hand as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if you can elaborate a little bit on your research finance service. Is it so that you can help finding funding for some of the research, or is it more us researching or us funding the research ourselves? Are there any opportunities to have finances from other parties?
I can speak a little bit to this, and then Andrea can jump in. So research finance is more kind of transactional. That department is more about kind of facilitating payments, but certainly roles like Andrea and other research development roles are, one of their mandates is to try and find funding for these types of collaborations. We recognize we can't bring a project into our hospital without having some type of funding to support it. So Andrea's done a very good job of pairing our researchers with funding opportunities to work towards a certain project. So absolutely, we understand that we need to help find the support for these types of collaborations.
Yeah, Katie's right. That would largely kind of fall under my role and team. And I'll go into a little bit about, sort of different types of funding opportunities that we can leverage and sort of different types of agencies a little bit later in the presentation, in the workshop. Thank you for the question.
Excellent. Marty, I didn't realize you were a Norwegian company. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. And it's I'm trying to help everybody here, as Lori is. So it's great to be in really good session, Andrea. I guess this is to Andrea and Katie. I'm curious if you have some form of, do you have a formal process for intake? Many of these companies that Lori and I have been working with, they've all got really, really powerful, really compelling, interesting, different value propositions, opportunities to collaborate. And some are actively selling and some are at early stages of research. Nonetheless, even the research is unique. Do you have a standard, you may be getting into this, but do you have like a standard kind of intake form, which is like one pager where you ask the company to say, give us the highlights, the quick punch facts, so that you can actually quickly assess, what is the next step of the intake process itself? Thank you.
Andrea, did you want to speak to this? Because I know that we've done a lot of work on the portal.
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't, as an institution, have a formal process. But what we have done is work very closely with Alex on our health innovation, what's it called? HIPP.
Patient Partnership
Portal. Okay. And so, I would direct, companies usually back to the Synapse website where, Alex and I have worked for quite closely to get at sort of the salient points that we would be looking for in an initial sort of intake. And then, him and I, just like we will conduct, our one-on-ones, after the workshop, we'll sort of go through and ask, kind of the right questions to be able to determine whether there's the right alignment, for HHS and the company. So we have heavily relied on Alex to sort of help us formalize that process. Otherwise, it would just be, inquiries that are directed to me, and I'll do a one-on-one with them, take, 30 minutes to an hour to understand what their solutions are, where I might see a fit. And then of course, I'm checking with my colleagues on where we can capitalize on that.
Great, thank you.
I'll add just two small little pieces, which I think may be salient or of interest for the companies here. The first is that whether engaging with Hamilton Health Sciences or with any Canadian hospital, and I suspect any Norwegian or hospital globally, and I hope I'm not stealing too much of Adam's thunder here, but the identification of a clinical champion, a researcher or an investigator who is working on, who is either working on clinical care in the area of concern or that is relevant to your product, or is doing research in that area, is something is an asset that just cannot be understated. Because what that allows is for someone within the system who will be able to pull along and to act as an advocate, as a voice for you within the hospital or within a care facility. So identifying potential partners is critical. One of the most important roles that Andrea plays, amongst many, is understanding where that connection might be and facilitating that connection where appropriate, so that she can act as a bridge to identify who that champion might be. And it's from that you get to Finn's question, which is that researcher or that physician may apply for funding for a joint project and be able to access funding that as from the public sector perspective that you as a private entity might not be able to, or vice versa. And so really just sort of underlying that, and that's a lot of what we try to do, is kind of that matchmaking. The second piece, and I'll toot my horn just a little bit here, is that one of the reasons why we created the partnership portal is because sometimes HHS may not necessarily be the right partner. And so I can act as a bit of a clearinghouse to be able to direct you. For example, it might be actually St. Joseph's, because maybe your interest is in, renal care, or it's in mental health or addiction. And in fact, so HHS doesn't specialize in those areas, and it's a different hospital. Or maybe it's what you really need is access to engineering lab and testing facilities that are embedded within our college or within our university. And so I'll direct you there. So that's a little bit about why we created Synapse, to act as a bit of a gatekeeper. But so Andrea, thank you. And I am also very excited that you're going to dive even deeper into some of these thematic areas sort of after the break. But Adam, we have kept you waiting. So I'd like to turn it over to you to talk to us a little bit about the private sector collaboration with a Canadian hospital, kind of sort of starting to get into the meat, which I think will be of real interest to the group. So yeah. Adam, over to you.
Awesome, thanks, Alex. There was a little bit of a spoiler alert there from Alex. So I will be talking about clinical champions. So I'm Adam. You may have noticed that I don't look like the picture that was put up earlier. That's a bit of an old picture, and I am no longer the clean-shaven, short-haired guy from that picture. COVID has kind of turned me into a caveman. So my role is still the same, though. Like I said earlier, my job is to make sure that clinical studies that are going on at my hospital are running according to the rules and the regulations. So I'm here to talk to you today about what private sector collaboration with the clinical hospital kind of looks like, and what kind of considerations that you're going to need to think about before you engage with one of those clinical partners. So let's start. So why would you, as a private sector, why would you want to collaborate with a hospital? So your goal as private sector is to get your product to market. You want to be able to sell that. So there's kind of two reasons for that. So reason number one is your product is going to be providing some kind of therapeutic benefit to the end user. And then the other benefit, which is a little bit nicer for everybody, is your company benefit. So you make money, your company gets a better reputation, and all things are good in the world. So in general, why would you want to choose a hospital? So hospitals do have that clinical expertise. They have clinicians, they have professional staff who are aware of the therapeutic area that your product is in, and they are able to help you with some of your product development. Hospitals also have a better access to the patient population that you're going to study. Now, what kind of differentiates a Canadian hospital from other hospitals is that Canadian hospitals have access to a very diverse patient population. So as you can see here, about 10 years ago, over 20% of Canada's total population was actually foreign-born. Our Stat Canada is predicting by 10 years from now, that number is going to go up to 25 to 28%. When I was doing some research for this presentation, I actually saw one source that said a couple of years ago, we were in the neighborhood of about 23 to 24%. So if you're kind of extrapolating from there, you might be able to say that by 2031, we might be able to beat that prediction by StatCan. So why is that important? When you are doing a product evaluation in a therapeutic product, it's very beneficial to do those tests in a very diverse population with many ethnic backgrounds, because what's going to end up happening is you're going to end up with a higher quality data set, because that data set is going to be more generalizable to the global population. So next slide. Perfect. So, what are some types of collaborative engagement you can get in with the hospital? So I kind of like to break these down into two buckets. There's your product development and your product evaluation. So in terms of product development, these are all the activities that you're going to be doing upfront. It's all the upfront work. And for product evaluation, this is where you kind of get into the nuts and bolts of your actual studies. So next slide. So product development. Like I said earlier, your goal as a private sector is to take your product to market. One of the main steps is right at the beginning is getting that concept. So what you want to make sure you're doing is you are properly defining the problem. If you can make sure that your product will be able to enter a gap in a market where you'll have uptake, then that is enormously helpful. If you collaborate with hospital clinicians, they are an absolutely amazing resource because they can give you input on those real life scenarios where your product could work. So you could either go to a clinician and say, hey, I have this great product. Do you think it could work? And they could give you some feedback, or clinicians could come to you and say, I know you work in this space. I've kind of identified an area where we could use a product. Do you think you could help? Also, in terms of product development, access to all those clinicians and patients in a hospital, they are going to be your end users. They're going to be the ones who are going to be benefiting from your product. So they can help with design efforts, kind of giving you, ideas about what it is that they want, which is really going to help you with your market evaluation. So next slide. Okay, so product evaluation. Now, this is Public Health Ontario's 10 steps for conducting an evaluation. I'm not going to go through each one of these. The kind of idea behind any type of evaluation can be I like to summarize them just into kind of 3 steps. So number 1 is you have to ask a question. Number 2 is you have to figure out how you want to answer that question. So if you're designing a study, how are you going to make sure that you are collecting the information that you need to answer your original question? And then the 3rd step is analyzing that data to figure out if you've answered your question the way you were hoping to. There are countless ways that you can evaluate a product. The one type of evaluation that I want to talk to you today about is a clinical trial. So can we just go to the next slide, Alex? Perfect, thank you. So clinical trials, they are definitely the most robust way of conducting a product evaluation, but they're also the most reliable in terms of gathering high quality data. So a clinical trial is a study where you're going to test a new product on a target population. There are different types of clinical trials, observational or interventional, regulated or non-regulated, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But why, as a company, you might want to look at doing a clinical trial is because if your product needs to be studied or evaluated, or if there's any uncertainty about it, or if you're going to be making a marketing claim, you want to collect the data that's required to either back up that claim or to be able to demonstrate to your end users, to regulatory agencies, that your product works. So next slide. So clinical trials. The majority of the time you see clinical trials in pharmaceuticals. There's generally 4 phases to how clinical trials work. So before we even get into the clinical trial, you always have your preclinical work. So with pharmaceuticals, generally this is all, your animal, your lab studies. And then you move into your phase 1 studies. So these are your first in human studies. These are strictly safety studies. These are going to use a very, very small number of patients, as shows here, typically 10 to 100. These are generally healthy volunteers. And the main goal of a phase 1 study is to make sure that your product is actually safe to use in humans. Once you have enough data that you can, confidently show that it's safe to use in humans, you can move into phase 2 studies, which are slightly larger. You're going to be using anywhere from about 50 to 300 patients. Now you're going to start introducing patients who actually have the certain indication that you're trying to study. And you're still primarily looking at safety outcomes, but you're also starting to look at the efficacy, how well that product works in your target population. Once you feel confident with your phase 2 studies, you can move into phase 3 trials, which are your confirmation trials. And these are very large trials, thousands of participants. You're still looking at some safety data, but now you're really trying to determine how well your product works. And this is always the last stage before you would submit to a regulatory agency for approval. And then after you get your approval, you can do phase 4 studies, which are your long-term studies, where you're going to start to evaluate the product in a real-life setting. So how it's used in the community, and a lot of times what you're looking for is if there's any long-term effects, any long-term toxicity, anything like that, any possible long-term outcomes that you didn't have the opportunity to see throughout the first 3 stages. So next slide, please. Okay, so like I said earlier, there's a couple types of clinical trials. I'm going to talk about observational trials and interventional trials. So observational trials are basically where you evaluate a population without controlling who is or who is not exposed to a certain treatment. Whereas an interventional study, you are now intentionally designating patients to a certain treatment group. Randomized controlled trials are known as the gold standard of research studies. So interventional studies are far more controlled. So for example, if you're evaluating a drug product, you could have a group of say 500 patients and you would say 250 people are going to get our new experimental treatment and the other 250 people are going to get a placebo. And then you would measure your endpoints and be able to try and determine whether or not that drug product that you gave to your first treatment group actually had the intended benefits as opposed to your placebo group. They are a little more rigorous in terms of conduct, but they definitely provide you better data. Observational trials do work as well, although they don't always factor in for some uncontrollable data points that might come up. So one example of an observational trial that I usually like to give people is if you were to study, say, again, a group of patients, and you were able to see that that people who practice meditation tend to have a lower incidence of heart disease. That's a very valid conclusion from your study, but there are other factors that may have gone into that, such as exercise, eating habits, things like that. So interventional studies are definitely a little bit more controlled, but more rigorous. But if you're looking for high quality data, then an interventional randomized controlled trial is definitely the way to go. Next slide. So like I was saying, there are multiple ways of doing product evaluations, but clinical trials are definitely the highest standard that you can meet. What you want to try and do is take some of the considerations from clinical trials into your type of product evaluation. So like I said earlier, kind of looping back to the Public Health Ontario's 10 steps of product evaluation, you want to have well-defined endpoints. So before you get started on your study, you want to make sure that what you're looking for is going to help answer your questions. You also want to make sure that the sites that you're using have knowledge of that investigational area. So the staff members, the clinicians, the technicians, everybody who's working at that site, they need to have the expertise in your study area to effectively contribute. Like we've been saying, engaging with a hospital is enormously beneficial because you get lots of different people with a lot of experience involved, and you also get various departments involved. So if your study requires that an MRI or some type of image gets taken, you're going to be collaborating with the diagnostic imaging department, or if you have a software design product that you're going to be using, you're going to be working with hospital IT. It's enormously helpful to make sure that your site has that knowledge and expertise. You also want to make sure that you have very, very well-defined inclusion and exclusion criteria for your study participants, because having that population refined to what your potential end user is going to look like is going to mean that your product is going to be more effective at the end. And looping back to why Canada is so great, is that we have that diversity of participants to produce better data that's going to make your product more generalizable to the global population. And like Alex said earlier, having a clinical champion is enormously beneficial. Identifying somebody at the start of your study is a huge help. They can help with your product design. They can engage with the hospital to really drive the bus in terms of getting getting the trial started in an effective manner. Next slide. So to summarize my first kind of section here, your goal is to market a product. Hospitals have access to patients and clinicians. They are going to be your end users. Clinicians can be your clinical champion. They can help with product development as well as patients advising for what they are looking for in a final product. Engaging with a hospital, you have greater access to all those patients that you need, and they have the resources required to perform those study procedures. And choosing a Canadian hospital gives you access to a more diverse set of patients with different ethnic backgrounds. So I think that's the end of my first section. Do we want to take a section, take some time to ask a couple quick questions, or do you want me to just kind of power on through?
Adam, I think it's happy. Let's happy to give you a chance to sort of take a breather. Are there any questions just on this initial group? Again, Adam is going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the mechanics. Marty.
Hi, Adam. Thank you for that. A very quick question that I know we've been talking about with the innovators from Norway is the potential to, as you've rightly said, as has been indicated, their intent to come to Canada would in fact require often, in almost all circumstances, Health Canada approval, given the various products that they're offering. When they collaborate with you in the Hamilton Health Sciences and St. Joe's cluster on a trial, for example, could you actually please share with the group about it's about managing expectations, because absolutely there's a need to, I'll say, even though they may have local validation and local adoption, they may be selling locally within the Nordic countries or the European Union. When they come to Canada and need Health Canada approval, sometimes the local local evidence is what helps push Health Canada from an approval perspective across the line. So can you please share any thoughts or experience about, are you able to help align the study such that it can truly help accelerate or help ensure that there's no tripping points on the Health Canada approval? That questions related to that, or the construct related to that, please.
Yeah, I will cover this in my next section, so I won't get too deeply into it. But essentially, if you're looking to translate your product from your Norwegian market into Canadian market, as long as you have developed your data set in the Norwegian market in a way that the Health Canada regulators can be confident that they meet our standards as well, then that should be a relatively seamless transition over. And that comes down to good clinical practice guidelines, which I'll get into in my next section.
And I'd also say that there are also some regulatory marks. This is more pertinent for medical devices, but there's a CE mark that you can a designation that you can obtain from the European Union kind of regulatory body that will expedite testing and evaluation of a product's safety and efficacy within a hospital or clinical care setting. That will also be really valuable. And there are private sector partners that the Synapse Consortium works with who help companies to navigate the particulars of getting those regulatory marks. So the hospital can provide you with the data that you need and a testing environment, and we can also line up. It looks like Andrea might have one or two thoughts as well. So Andrea.
If I could just chime in and say, it is a good idea to look at predicate devices as well, or, just some sort of precedent to say, this type of application, if it's like, hot cold therapy, that the device can offer, or whatever it is, if that's already been approved in, neurology, that could be, you know, translated to something that you're doing, you know, in a different type of indication, but that can certainly help with building that body of evidence and sort of using that to you know, improve your sort of use case as well.
Excellent. And I just had one or two other kind of quick comments, and Adam, please, and Andrea, please feel free to bat me down if I stray too far out of my lane here. One thing that I think that just kind of is worth underlining is that while Adam is talking about clinical trials, I think a part of this is we understand that not every engagement interaction with a hospital, with a care partner, is going to be a clinical trial, and in fact, many are not. But a clinical trial, as Adam said, is the most complex and most subtle kind of interaction that you might undertake. And so there are things that are done within a clinical trial that you wouldn't have to do if you were just doing a customer product evaluation, or testing to see whether or not you can integrate within the IT system. But it is important to recognize that engaging with a hospital is not a simple thing, and that there are pathways and processes that need to be followed, and so that many of the elements and considerations of undertaking a clinical trial might also need to be done in order to do a product pilot, for example. And so we're trying to give you the most kind of complex kind of scenario in order for you to sort of say, right, there may be items that that you might encounter in your own engagement. The second thing I would say is that collecting the data through a trial, through a pilot, or through some sort of product development evaluation process. There's two big reasons why you might want to do this. One is, simply regulatory approval. And if you're going to operate within the Canadian or North American market, you're going to need that regulatory approval, even if it's just acknowledgement of the European regulatory mark and having that ported over. The second one, which I will stress, is that it allows you an opportunity to understand what is going to be required for customer buy-in. The customer or the hospital or the physician is going to be, in the end, the person who determines what amount of data, what amount of evidence is required in order for them to be able to initiate kind of the procurement process. And so the engagement with a hospital, you may end up developing the information that you already know, or validating impact that you've already shown elsewhere, but doing that in a Canadian context or in a North American context can provide assurances to other hospital partners and to other potential customers that the product is valid, because what you're going to be able to do is to leverage the goodwill and the reputation of your hospital partner to when you have other sales conversations or other engagements with people in a Canadian context or in a North American context. And then finally, the last thing I would say, I know that some of you are digital health companies and are not necessarily providing therapeutic solutions, but you're still going to need to demonstrate this effectiveness and efficiency. And it won't be enough to simply walk in and say, if you buy this product, I will save you, 25 minutes per nurse interaction, and you have 1,000 nurses, so therefore I'm going to save you, 250,000 krona a month. That's no longer a sales pitch that will work. You're going to need to demonstrate how you integrate, how much training is required, how it interacts with the existing systems, in addition to any efficacy and efficiency. And that's where these types of engagements are going to be really important. Now, I suspect since you're on this call, you know this, but I just wanted to underline those things before Adam takes us in to the in a little bit more detail around considerations for engaging with a Canadian hospital partner. So Adam, back to you.
Yeah, so this is this has more of the kind of meat and potatoes of what is required if you're going to be conducting a study here in Canada. There is quite a bit of information. My goal isn't to scare you, but my goal is to show you that there are many things that need to go on in order to effectively conduct a clinical study. So let's get going. There we go. So what you need to know, I like to break this down into again, kind of two little pockets. So I like to talk about system level standards first, which are the rules and the regulations that govern research all across Canada. It doesn't matter where you are, these are the rules that govern all. And then I like to kind of go down to site level standards, where these are some considerations. They're gonna vary between different sites. So as you can see, there's a couple topics I'm going to talk about here, but I want you to be able to know that what it is you have to meet on a Canadian scale, and then what little things you might have to tweak at a site level, at each different site that you choose to engage with. So next slide, please. So the big head honcho here in Canada is Health Canada. They are the regulatory body that looks over the sale, importation of any new drugs, devices, biologics. I know we have a couple companies here that are dealing with some antimicrobials or sterilization products, so that also falls under the authorization of Health Canada. So not only do they authorize the sale, but they also authorize clinical trials. And again, while doing some research for this presentation, Health Canada is very functionally similar to the Norwegian Medicines Agency. So hopefully that will help you kind of understand what the scope of what Health Canada does. So next slide. So again, kind of going back to my last section on different types of clinical trials, you can have regulated and non-regulated clinical trials. If it is a regulated clinical trial, that means that Health Canada is going to have to authorize you to conduct a clinical trial looking at any unauthorized drug, biologic, disinfectant, medical device, what have you, any new therapeutic product that has never been approved, or if you have an approved product that you are going to be using in a different manner than what it was originally approved for. So if you have a drug and you want to try it for a new indication, a different population, or if you're going to be trying different doses, then you would have to apply to Health Canada to get that approval. Now, what this means is once you have a regulated trial, that trial has to conform to some Canadian federal laws. So the big overarching law here is the Canadian Food and Drugs Act. And within that act, you have the Food and Drug and the Medical Device Regulations. So next slide. So the Food and Drug and the Medical Device Regulations, they are going to be the documents that really describe the requirements for how to conduct the study. They outline the responsibilities of people who are involved in these studies. For example, they explain what Health Canada's role is in terms of providing the authorization. But the most important ones for you to know are what the sponsor responsibilities are. Next slide. Okay, so by definition, a sponsor is an individual, institution, or organization that conducts a clinical trial. Essentially, whoever is most responsible for that conduct. So if you are a private sector company and your goal is to be conducting a study in order to gain market authorization, then you would be considered the sponsor. It holds the highest level of responsibility. Everything goes up the chain to the sponsor. So some of your responsibilities are to obtain authorization. So you will have to engage with Health Canada to get authorization to conduct that clinical trial. and also file any amendments to your study plans or notify them of any changes to your product. You'll also have to make sure that your product meets the labeling requirements that are outlined in the regulations. Throughout the study, you have to make sure that you are providing them with reports of any safety concerns or safety issues that have been discovered throughout your testing. And you also have to maintain study records. So here in Canada, if you are conducting a regulated trial, you have to keep all the records that were involved in that study. You have to keep them on file for 25 years after your product has received its approval. All these records, they need to be stored in a way that allows for the complete and accurate reporting and interpretation and verification of all those notes and files. So part of my role, I conduct clinical trial audits, and I try to conduct my audits in a very, very similar manner to how a Health Canada inspector would. And what I like to tell the investigators is you want to make sure that you're maintaining your records in a way that tells a story. So it ends up being a multiple binder, very, very long, very, very dry book. But the goal is for somebody who's external to be able to look at all these records and be able to tell exactly what happened in your study, at what time, and what the results were. The other main responsibility of a sponsor is to make sure your study is conducted in accordance with good clinical practice, which I mentioned earlier, and I will get to in a couple of slides. So next slide, please. So in terms of obtaining Health Canada authorization, if you are doing a drug trial or any kind of sterilization product, you will have to file a clinical trial application. If you're doing a device trial, you will file an investigational testing authorization for any class 2 to 4 medical device. Some of the items that you're going to have to submit to gain regulatory approval for your study, this is a couple examples. There are multiple things that you might be required to submit. Number one is the protocol, which is the most important document that you can have. It is your study plan, your study design. It is the rules on how every site is going to conduct the study in the exact same fashion in order to gather consistent quality data. Other information you might have to submit to Health Canada is anything about your product. So if you have an investigator brochure, which is kind of your how to use my products information booklet, any product monographs on how your product is designed, any safety information that you might have gathered through preclinical studies, or if you're doing clinical trials, any of phase 1, phase 2 studies, any of that safety information, Health Canada is going to want to see that before they give you approval. And they'll also want to see an example of your informed consent. So they want to be able to see what your study is, they want to see what your product is, and they want to see how participants are going to be made aware of what your product is and how it's going to be tested. So to be honest, this is like a very, very stressful activity to do. Submitting to Health Canada, it's very, very daunting. One of the things that is incredibly useful that Health Canada does is they offer pre-submission consultations. So you can actually go and speak to a representative of Health Canada before you even submit a single thing to them. And you can say, here's my product and I want to try and market it, and this is kind of how I'm thinking of going about it. What do you think? And Health Canada, it's a relatively informal process in comparison to the actual submission. But Health Canada representatives will be able to tell you exactly what it is that they're going to want to look for, not only in your initial submission, but they'll be able to help you determine what data you'll need to collect so that when it comes time for you to apply for market authorization, you will have the data that they will want to approve your products. So next slide, please. Okay, so research protocols. Like I said, this is the most important document that you can have in a clinical study. As you can see here, there are way too many possible sections to a protocol, but the reason I put this slide in here is to really demonstrate how detailed you will need to be and kind of give you an example or get you thinking about, you know, kind of different factors that you'll want to consider in your trial. One of the benefits to collaborating with clinicians at academic health institutions is they generally have quite a bit of experience in protocol development and for following protocols. So like we mentioned in the last section, when it comes to designing or developing the protocol, if you have that clinical champion, they will be able to really help you determine what types of information you are going to be required to put into a protocol. So next slide, please. Okay, so medical devices. Now, I know we have some medical device companies here and some software companies. So I wanted to throw this slide in here just to kind of keep everybody engaged, that kind of jumping right to the bottom, software can be a medical device. It doesn't seem like a medical device the way that, you know, a pacemaker would. But software could be considered a medical device if it meets the definition there at the top of being an instrument, apparatus, or a thing that is manufactured, sold, or represented for use in diagnosing, treating, mitigating, or preventing a disease, disorder, or abnormal physical state, or any of their symptoms in human beings or animals. So some examples of software that I have seen or that I have seen kind of thrown around are software programs that can interpret data and try and predict an outcome. So let's say, this is just one that I'm making up off the top of my head. Let's say you had an app that could take information from an Apple Watch and predict if somebody's going to have an epileptic stroke or an epileptic seizure. That is a medical device. And medical devices are broken down into 4 categories here in Canada. Class 1 is the lowest risk, and class 4 is the highest risk. So the determination on what class you will fall into really is up to Health Canada. But to kind of give you an example, class 1 is the lowest risk. It is least invasive, and the kind of question that you need to ask is what is the risk to the user if the medical device does not perform as intended? So like a class 1 medical device could be gauze, for example. If it doesn't work, not a big deal. Class 4, being highest risk, would be pacemakers. So if the pacemaker doesn't work the way it's supposed to, that's very, very bad news. So I just wanted to kind of throw this slide in there just so that everybody who is aware who might be working on some sort of software program to really take a look at what the intended use of your product is and that it may actually be considered a medical device here in Canada. So next slide, please. Okay, good clinical practice. So if you're conducting a clinical investigation here in Canada that is authorized by Health Canada, you are required to follow the good clinical practice guidelines. Basically, back in 1990, this organization was formed by the first 3 member organizations, which were the United States, Japan, and the European Union. And this group was formed because in the 80s, there was an increase in international marketing of pharmaceutical products. And what was happening is when a company would go to an international market and say, well, we have this new, let's say, pharmaceutical drug that we want to sell here in your country, is that okay? Different regulatory bodies didn't have the same standards. So what might be approved in Canada, for example, may not have been approved in Norway. So this group got together to streamline the safety and efficacy requirements for pharmaceuticals. And these guidelines have now been adopted by hundreds of countries in the world, Canada and Norway included. The first version of these were published in '96, and they were so good that it took 20 years for them to make an amendment to them, which was just a few years ago, where they included some more language on the technical use, the emerging technologies that are being used in clinical trials. Next slide, please. Perfect. So again, this is kind of one of those scary slides that I put in. As I said, it's in the good clinical practice guidelines are the standard that you want to meet and are accepted functionally everywhere in the world. There are a lot of topics in the good clinical practice guidelines. Again, going back to engaging with the hospital, or especially an academic institution, when you're conducting any study in Canada, the kind of standard that you're going for is you want to conduct the study according to GCP. And many academic institutions, ours included, HHS as well, all of our investigators are required to do good clinical practice training. So by engaging with an academic hospital, and I mean ours as well, there is a greater chance that the study staff who are going to be actually performing your study will have an understanding of these guidelines and will be able to conform to those rules and regulations. Next slide, please. Okay, there we go. Okay, good. I'm going a little quicker than I thought. So I've kind of covered the overarching rules and regulations and standards that you need to meet. But now I want to give you some things to think about when you are choosing your individual site. So the first topic I'm going to talk about is resources. So does your site have the resources to conduct your study? So if you are doing a study where you need an MRI taken, does the site have an MRI machine? Or does it have diagnostic capability to look at biomarkers in blood? Or if you're trying to integrate some software, does the site have the IT infrastructure to accommodate your product? When you are engaging with the hospital, you want to make sure that the resource departments are aware ahead of time of what the study impact may be. This kind of has a twofold reason. Number one is you can make sure that the resource department is engaged, but it also allows the resource department to make sure that they can separate your study from any of their clinical care that they provide on a regular basis. The other big resource consideration is personnel. So does the site have the people who can dedicate enough time to the study? And one of the most important people, other than a clinical champion at a site, to really help run your study is an experienced study coordinator. I added in here, a good study coordinator is actually worth their weight in gold. They are the ones who are going to be doing pretty much all of the day-to-day activities. So if you have a site that has access to experienced study coordinators, that is immensely, immensely helpful. So next slide, please. So budgets and funding. So I know Andrea just kind of mentioned this earlier, but some of the considerations you want to think about is who's paying for the study. So if it's an industry funded study, if you are going to be paying for that study, one of the budget considerations you have to consider is overhead. Many institutions charge overhead on industry-funded studies, anywhere sometimes between 20 to 40 additional percent. So just something you want to consider. As we mentioned earlier, there sometimes can be access to federal or provincial grants or public funding. These are generally extremely competitive, but having a clinical champion can help. And also, most of the time, academic institutions don't charge overhead on some of those grants. You'll also want to consider site fees. So let's say you needed that MRI. How much does an MRI cost from site to site? It may vary. How much do the people cost? So if you have that experienced research coordinator, what's their hourly rate? What are their benefits? What's the annual cost of living increase that you might have to factor in? If you're doing a drug study, are you going to be using the pharmacy to store the drug or to dispense the drug? And you also want to consider ethics reviews because many ethics boards will charge industry a fee for reviewing your study. Next slide, please. So kind of continuing on with ethics reviews there. A lot of sites have their own ethics boards. Academic institutions are doing a lot of research, so it's very, very beneficial for them to have a local ethics board that is not only familiar with the Health Canada regulations and the GCP guidelines, but are also aware of the local ethics requirements. So for example, I work for the Research Institute of St. Joe's, which is affiliated with St. Joseph's Healthcare Hamilton. St. Joseph's is a Catholic faith-based hospital. So in consent forms, especially for pharmaceutical products, a non-faith-based organization would have some wording surrounding the use of birth control, whereas that does not align with the faith of the institution. So some of the wording would have to be changed to, practice adequate family planning. So those local ethics boards really know what is required at each individual site. You also want to consider timing of ethics review. How long does it take? Some ethics boards meet relatively frequently. Our Hamilton Integrated Research Ethics Board, they meet twice a month. Some ethics boards only meet once a month. Some sites ethics boards might meet every 2 months. So you want to make sure that you factor in those meeting dates when it comes to when you're going to submit to the ethics boards and how long it might take to review that, because that's going to govern when you can start your study and how quickly you can start gathering data. You also want to consider timelines for potential provisional approvals. So sometimes you may go to your ethics board and say, here's my idea for the study. And they can say, that's great, we love it, but we just need some clarification on a few extra points. So there might be a little bit of extra back and forth. The other thing you need to factor into is if you're doing a multi-site study. So if you're doing a multi-site study, each individual site needs to get their own ethics approval. Now, that can increase costs, but it can also increase timelines. The one nice thing about Ontario here is we have a centralized ethics review system through an organization called Clinical Trials Ontario, where they can provide a single ethics review that will cover all different sites in Ontario. That saves you money and also saves you some time. So next slide, please. And clinical study agreements. So I think this is my last slide before I sum everything up. I know Andrea talked about clinical study agreements earlier, but just to remind you that anytime there's a transfer of funds, materials, data, anything going between organizations, you're going to want to have a clinical trial or some type of agreement in place. And that type of agreement is dependent on the scope of the work. So if it's just data, material, or what have you, the one thing you have to remember is that these negotiations, they do take time. Some are relatively quick. Some might take a week. Some might take 8 months. So just try and make sure that you're factoring that in that potential lag time for when you anticipate to start that data collection, because you can't start your data collection until you have an agreement and you have your ethics approval or your Health Canada approval as well. Some of the clauses to consider that might be in some of the contracts, and I'm speaking on this from an academic institution perspective, because I know our contract reviewers put a little bit of emphasis on these, are so responsibility. So who's responsible for doing what? You need to make sure that that's really, really clearly outlined in that contract. Who's funding the study? Publication rights. So, will the investigator at the site be able to publish? And if there's any intellectual property rights that arise from that study, who's going to own those? So next slide, please. Okay, so to sum everything up, because I know that was like a lot of information, and I've tried to condense it into 4 points of the considerations that you need to know before you enter Canada. So number one, Health Canada is the regulatory body here. If you are going to be conducting a study on an unapproved or previously approved product that you're using in a different indication, you need to get Health Canada authorization. And I can't stress enough how important and how useful those pre-submission meetings can be. If you have a regulated trial, you have to follow those food and drug and the medical device regulations, which means you have to follow good clinical practice guidelines. And if you're looking at potential sites, just make sure you're factoring in some of those requirements that I mentioned earlier in terms of what it might cost you and when, and timelines for when you'll be able to start collecting data. So that is the end of my section. I'm sure I probably just completely saturated a lot of people's mind, and that was a complete blur for me. I really just kind of kept going. So hopefully you had a chance to absorb some things, or hopefully I've maybe, got the wheels turning where you might have some questions. So I'll turn it back to Alex so I can give myself to just get a drink of water.
Fantastic. No, thank you, Adam. I really appreciate that. And as you say, that was a it was a fair bit, and I think that was certainly, as as you, Andrea, and I sat down with Lori, it was our intention to try and sort of give a fair amount of information, if only to communicate, I think, for those who have not yet gone through in a regulatory approval process or an engagement process with a hospital or a care facility, that just the some of the complexity that's involved. It's not simply a case of just picking up the phone and saying, I'd like to run a pilot. There's a lot of work that goes into it. I have one or two kind of questions, but before I say anything, I certainly wanted to provide an opportunity for those who are on the call to see if they have any specific questions. If there's any elements there that they'd like to hear a little bit more from either yourself or from Andrea. Are there any questions on the from the companies on the call? Well, maybe I might ask one, and this is sort of at a very high level, Adam. I'm recognizing that there's a whole range of potential types of engagement. I was wondering, taking maybe the two ends of the two extreme ends, can you give a sense of, in nice round numbers, what it might cost to do, say, kind of a very short study, maybe not a trial, but maybe like a product assessment or kind of a market evaluation, what it might cost from a budgetary perspective, kind of all in, versus a multi-year phase 3 study of a medical device. Like what are the kind of what are the numbers that we're kind of looking at?
Or do you want those numbers more from a site perspective, or from a kind of whole, what it might cost the company?
Sure, what it might cost a company, kind of all in, recognizing that that part of that is, and I think I'm glad you mentioned it, the the overhead, which is baked in. So what kind of investment might what might a company need to make in order to do kind of those two types of engagements?
It all kind of comes down to what kind of engagement you're doing.
Yep.
I would say if it's a type of study or type of evaluation that's relatively short-lived, doesn't require a huge amount of resources, like you said, some kind of like patient engagement, some sort of feedback thing, I would say that that's obviously going to be the cheapest, least expensive way to conduct this. I would say I'd be surprised if you could maybe hit $5,000. Again, it all kind of comes down to what's being done. Whereas, like you said, if you have a phase 3 clinical trial with multiple participants and a bunch of resources being used, that can cost at a single site, I would say, easily north of $50,000, $85,000. I've seen some budgets up to about $250,000 just for a single site.
Excellent. No, and I think that's good to kind of get that sort of sense. And for those who are kind of doing the mental math, that's about 30,000 krona to about 1.6 million krona. Just to kind of give a sense of, and if you start doing multiple sites over multiple years, you can increase that. But it's and then kind of on those two kind of extremes. You talked about kind of 3 big buckets of work. There was kind of the preparatory pre-work, then there was the actual study and data gathering and engagement, and then there's kind of the post-work process. Can you speak a little bit to the different lengths of times you've seen some of those buckets? Again, recognizing that different levels of complexity may result in longer ones, but just to give kind of a sense of how long some of these processes are as these companies think about timelines.
Yeah, so like one of the best examples that I could have is for the kind of general timelines that it takes for a pharmaceutical company to market a new chemical entity. So generally in the pharmaceutical market, you come up with a new drug, you have your little shapes and your sticks and all of that, some fun stuff that you patent. And that patent lasts for 20 years, which is when you can start testing. Usually you will come up with the drug, you'll test it in a preclinical setting for typically 3 to 4 years, hopefully quicker, based on how the results are going. If you're doing a full-blown clinical trial, all the way from phase 1 up to phase 3, that can take sometimes in the neighborhood of 10, 12 years. So there is quite a bit of time.
And for kind of for non-clinical trial sort of for work that requires kind of engagement with with hospital partners and IT systems, et cetera. Do you have a sense, and maybe Andrea might be also be able to kind of to pipe up too, but do you have a sense of kind of I suspect the longest ones can just kind of stretch out forever, but do you have sort of a sense of what some of the quicker ones might be, like a quick study?
I'm just trying to think if there's any kind of recent examples that I have off the top of my head. I find one of the kind of those, pre, then the actual study, and then the post, I find there's a lot of work that goes into the pre bucket, all the planning, engaging with the hospital, engaging with the various departments. How are we going to plan to do this? And the reason that I say that, and why I think it's pretty important that the preemptive work is done at an incredibly high level of detail, is so that once you actually start collecting your data, if you've done all of the preemptive work well to begin with, you'll be more confident that the data you collect in that study is being done correctly, and you're going to have a much higher quality data set to use.
Gotcha. Andrew, did you, I saw that you kind of came on. Did you want to build on that?
Yeah, I do. I think one other important point to stress to the group is that you're not just looking at, one engagement or one study, right? There will be multiple studies and, of course, multiple considerations for what type of evidence you're looking to generate. As we mentioned before, it might be a clinical trial or more of a rigorous, sort of randomized interventional study, for, regulatory approval or, those types of things. Or it might be, and then you might have to move to either before or after, an evaluation in a particular clinical setting to say, how does that work within that workflow, for that hospital site to get, as Marty mentioned, that sort of Canadian context and evidence. So I think I just want the group to keep in mind that, you're not just sort of planning for one study or budgeting for one study. There may be sort of multiple questions you're asking, and they could be, sort of related or dependent on, the results of a previous investigation, whatever the case is. So I want to stress, firstly, that. And then secondly, in terms of, a timeline, a lot of it really varies depending on recruitment numbers. How often if you're looking for a patient population for, I don't know, like nerve repair, in your hand, like how often do these types of surgeries happen? What type of surgeon do you have involved in this study? What do recruitment numbers at HHS or perhaps tapping into other sites? They maybe see, let's say, they do 4, visits or consultations a month. You might recruit maybe 1 out of the 4 that, typically would be a good candidate for surgery. So, if you're looking at, how you're powering that study, again, a very important component of being able to generate good evidence to answer your research questions, your timelines could largely depend on that. Having said that, I would say on average, a lot of the pilot studies that we take on lately at Hamilton Health Sciences, which isn't sort of the highest end, rigorous clinical trial, might be in the ballpark, I would say, of about 12 to 18 months, if I could, sort of give a number there.
Yep.
So I think, that those are all just really important considerations to keep in mind when you're designing the study. And of course, that should be very much in collaboration and consultation with the clinical champion or champions that you're working with.
Fantastic. And I'm certainly, again, sort of open and encourage if there are any other questions from the group. I have one other kind of quick question kind of to both of you. Having kind of digested what Adam has shared and as you guys both think about sort of your experience working with lots of different on lots of different types of projects and with lots of different partners, can you speak to kind of, again, maybe at a high level, some of the nuances and subtleties of working with kind of digital digital health kind of companies who are working on digital health applications? Just because I know a couple of those in the audience are working on software. Can you speak to a little bit about kind of the shape or the nature of those engagements, and maybe surface some of the elements that were really important, or identify those which are less important? And I don't know if Adam or Andrea, maybe that's an unfair question, but if either of you guys can kind of speak to that sort of piece, I think that would be interesting.
Andrew, did you want to go? I'm not a big IT person. My computer is 10 years old and barely starts on a good day, so I'm even lucky to be here right now. But like in terms of some of the digital stuff that I've seen, I just know that our IT department, there's a lot of security concerns. You want to make sure that there's secure access, and that if there's any data flowing, that it's done according to some privacy laws and hospital policies. But like I said, I'm not a big IT guy.
No, not a problem. Andrew, any thoughts about kind of when you're engaging, or when HHS is engaging with in digital solutions rather than kind of tangible kind of medical devices?
Yeah, definitely. I have some comments on that, and I think you'll see a little bit of that in the case examples that I'll show in a little bit as well, because it is a hybrid in terms of an actual medical device, but also there's a software component that's sort of continuously monitoring heart rate, and then that data access piece. So for us, we definitely on quite a number of these types of projects and interactions at Hamilton Health Sciences, particularly, I suppose because Ted Scott is quite passionate about digital health. He has, an extensive training and background, in that as well. I am nowhere near a technical person, but we happen to, work on a lot of those types of projects. And having gone through that process, numerous times, there are often some kind of key hurdles or, points that definitely need to be addressed. We are quickly learning that anything that has, a digital health component or a software component should be vetted by our privacy and security officers at almost like the earliest stage possible, and that sort of means prior to submitting an ethics approval. So nowhere near when you're about to start, but this is just like after we've had a good consultation, you've identified clinical champions, kind of what your patient cohort might look like. You're starting to develop that research protocol. We would want to take that information about your solution, what sort of security and privacy measures have been put in place. Are they compliant with, our HIPAA guidelines within Canada, and, sort of consult with our IT team at that point. Our IT team is called HITS, in case I refer to them that way in the future, to sort of just mitigate any risks proactively as possible. We are finding lately that our HIREB board, which is our ethics review board, does consult with them as well when they do get these types of applications, and they are looking for their input. So it's just to be able to sort of proactively say, we have had a consultation, these were their concerns, or these were the considerations, or these are perhaps the workarounds that we need to put in place in order for our institution and to be comfortable with working with, said software or platform, or, considerations of interoperability or integration and that type of thing. So that's one that we've seen as a fairly sort of recent awareness, that we want to keep in mind. And then again, I'll go into it a little bit later, but I think it's keeping in mind when it comes to digital health platforms, the interoperability and data, sort of portal connection piece that might be involved. To be perfectly frank, our current system is incredibly out of date. It is an old, sort of cumbersome system that's obviously been acknowledged, and we are working towards that transition, but we are in fairly early stages of that transition. So, I'm very clear with companies from sort of the get-go to say, like, we don't have this, fancy portal and, great command center view of everything that you can kind of just plug your system into to be able to, in an ideal world, have all your clinical care providers, connect to one piece and be able to view the patient and have, real-time monitoring and data and stats and everything, easily accessible at this point in time. That is what we're working towards, but that is currently a challenge for us. And if, that connectivity piece is hinged on, is paramount to the success of implementing said solution, that will be a challenge, in this current environment. So, while there are sometimes in certain ways less challenges when it comes to digital solutions, because there might be less of a regulatory obligation or component there as opposed to a medical device, there are certainly a slew of other challenges that may come up from more of a connectivity, interoperability, technical standpoint. That it isn't to say it can't be done. It's just that it definitely would require consultation with multiple different departments within HHS to mitigate and manage and sort of to find ways to make that effective.
No, I think that's really helpful, and I think that it's certainly one of the pieces that I'm hearing from you both is that that while there may be in some ways there is work that does not have to be done because you have a kind of a digital solution, there are also other areas that actually reveal themselves as complications and as a that introduce complexity that you wouldn't otherwise have to face. I'm going to just there were just two other the two or three other little things that I just wanted that I thought thematically both of you touched on, and I just wanted to flag and just kind of underline. And then again, if there are any questions, certainly encourage them. And then after which we'll take a quick break, a 5-minute break, so everyone can kind of stretch their arms and their legs. The first piece that I just want to mention was that a consideration that especially for digital solutions is thinking through the training and education that is required as part of the kind of the protocol process. Simply providing a nurse or a doctor or a patient with a digital tool and assuming that they're going to be able to use it is one that is a pitfall that we've seen multiple times, and that it leads to non-compliance, leads to limited uptake, and that can really impact your how your pilot or how your product study works. Another consideration, again, for digital solutions that's really relevant is to really think critically about what it is that you're replacing. And whether or not you're building on top of something else. Are you bolting into a system, or are you a brand new component that's never been absorbed, or are you replacing an existing process? Replacing technology within a hospital setting is very difficult. The default is often to just simply have both solutions available to practitioners, and then they can pick and choose. Actually swapping something out, you're going to run into kind of cultural opposition and kind of adoption challenges, which is also another big theme, which is just sort of the human component of any trial. So this is a gross generalization, and hopefully I'll get a nod from Andrea and Adam. But my sense is that most studies, most engagements fail not because the technology didn't work, not because there wasn't sufficient funding, not because there wasn't permission or ethics approval, but rather that patients or practitioners weren't suitably engaged and didn't have the right buy-in, and so that the solution was not integrated into existing processes, or the process wasn't sufficiently reformed to be able to surface the value and demonstrate the efficacy of the product being tested and evaluated. So really thinking about how, and that gets back to the clinical champions, that gets back to the research coordinators, that gets back to buy-in from the research administration teams, and these are that don't neglect the human component of kind of innovation, because that's kind of that's at the core of it. The final two things I would
Can I
just
add to
oh yeah,
that?
of course.
You know, often in my role, I find that, you know, there are solutions that are presented to us and they, you know, as a discrete, you know, sort of event or activity or product, it sounds like a great idea. But, you know, building a little bit on what Alex said, I think innovators need to be agile and flexible and understand that it is still an iterative process, particularly when you are, you know, you may have an MVP with a minimum viable product, you may be, you know, pre-commercial, but have sort of what you think is the end product. But once we sort of have that interaction and collaboration, there may be instances, and I find that's often the case, where, you know, there definitely needs to be iterations and tweaks of the solution, of the platform, of how it's accessed, of how it's used, of how it integrates, you know, whatever the case may be. And it could be all of those things that need to be work in progress. And I think it's really important to stress that innovators need to understand that, you know, it's not, you don't have a ready built made product for the most part, you know, that I usually have seen. It definitely requires some tweaking to meet the needs and to like really meet the true problem that it is hoping to solve. And you know, I think that's just the important point that I want to bring home.
Excellent. Yeah. The last piece that I would just say is when you are pitching and when you are framing your solution, two additional to have two little thoughts in your head. The first is that if is your solution trying to solve everything, every sort of element of a problem, or is it trying to solve one thing? There is a natural hesitancy with adopting a solution that tries to solve everything. One is that I think we've all heard about, it will answer all your problems in one single app. Well, I have yet to see a single app that solves all my problems. And when you claim that it solves all your problems in one single thing, it also means it's like, well, you know, does that mean I'm giving up everything else? And how complex is that to change and reorder all of my processes to now fit them through this sort of single application or the single portal? It can feel a little bit difficult to say, oh, I'm only solving one thing. But at the same time, look at the type of products that you currently use that only do one thing and the longevity that they have. You know, like I mean, we all use pens or pencils. They do only one thing, but there are a lot of pens and pencils out there. And so it's, you know, you can have market penetration doing one thing and doing one thing really well. It also allows you for very simplistic and easy to understand kind of pitching and value proposition kind of formation and communication, which I know is certainly something that Marty is talking to you all about. The last thing I would just say when also speaking with hospitals as part of kind of the preparatory work is you don't have to articulate it, but be aware of the opportunity costs that you are asking your partners to incur in working with you. Andrea only has, 10 hours, though, well, maybe she sometimes works 14 and 16 hours, but she only has a certain amount of time every day in order to be able to work. And every time she chooses to work with someone, it means it's someone she's not choosing. And that also should be something that is a lesson you should take internally, because if you encounter someone who says no, it may not necessarily because they don't find or see value in your product, but rather they're already engaged and don't have the bandwidth to work with you. So so just those kind of just little thoughts. Now we're a little bit past, I think we're at 1700 hours. What I would like though to do is I'd like to give everyone maybe a minute or two for a break just to stretch. I know I need to stand up at least once every couple of hours. So why don't we, because it is it's 11 o'clock Eastern time, I think it's as I said, 1700 or 5 o'clock in Norway. Why don't we say we'll come back in kind of in 2 or 3 minutes, and we will we'll then tee up Andrea and have that discussion. So we'll see everyone in 3 minutes. Okay. All right, we'll come back in 1 minute. All right, Andrea. So, Andrea, I'll turn it over to you to talk through a little bit about the evaluating the. Oh, looks like there's one thing in the chat. Okay, yeah. So we'll turn it over to you.
Great. So in my role as Research Development and Innovation Officer, as I mentioned, I'm kind of that first point of contact for a lot of companies, such as yourselves, to have a initial discussion about your technology or innovation, and just determine appropriateness, alignment with our health system priorities, and most importantly, if you haven't already identified a clinical champion, as we sort of stressed throughout the workshop, help you try to link up to find, that key stakeholder who will help to, spearhead any sort of future engagement or study. So I think, I'm going to take some time to just give you a sense of sort of what we look for as an organization from more of like a holistic level. So go to the next slide, please. Really our strategic theme from HHS's perspective is around patient-centered innovation. How can we, as I keep mentioning, deliver better health outcomes more efficiently and, fulfill our mission of better care for all. So, really like a lot of those enablers that we feel will be important is, that virtualization of care and leveraging the use of synchronous, but also asynchronous communication. Do you need that direct one-on-one visit, or is it something that, you could message to a portal or, send a picture in of, or a scan, or whatever it is? Like, do we constantly need to be there and interacting on a like synchronous direct contact, or are there better ways to fulfill that? Just sort of as an example. Secondly, as an enabler, we really want to leverage value from data services and be able to inform the way we make clinical decisions, right? So I think, we're really focusing on achieving those operational improvements within our organization from, at least identifying some priority areas that we would want to focus in on. From HHS's perspective, our focus, I would say, as our strategy and continued focus will be, I think, on cardiology, neurology, and oncology. So those are sort of our where our expertise is, where we want to see a lot of those operational, improvements. It's not to say we won't consider other things, but I think those are, from an enterprise perspective and an innovation strategy perspective, those are some of our focuses, at least as of late. Of course, how do we improve, and how does that affect, our care quality that we're offering as a public health, entity? And then, and I think this is really, sort of the maturation of, our process and of, all of our individual sort of learnings as we're going through this process. How do we actually enable sustainable growth? So for, a while, we had been doing a lot of pilots, sort of just one-off projects. We thought that we had an interesting solution. We found, a good fit for it somewhere, in a clinic, in a research department, on a ward, wherever the case is. And they, sort of conduct their pilot, but then what, right? I think we weren't sort of looking at the bigger picture of like, what would that mean for our enterprise? How do we see this have a long-term impact or growth to our organization, and how do we make this a sustainable part of our enterprise? So I think we're really looking at that latter piece and taking that more into consideration now as we evaluate potential collaborations. We can move to the next slide. A little bit, I think this is usually the slide that most people that I'm talking to resonate with, in terms of just seeing, okay, what is it that they're sort of looking for? So, this is really our sort of decision matrix, and the focus on, how early stage or later stage companies and projects can work toward validating these technologies and innovations in a hospital setting like Hamilton Health Sciences or St. Joe's. What sort of things are we looking for? And I think, that's safe to say that it would be across, all Ontario, all Canadian, and beyond, sort of healthcare organizations. But these are really sort of the three areas that we would like to focus on. And you can kind of see in my case example, I'll go back to it to say, these are sort of the aspects that we're looking for. The clinical outcomes, of course, was it improvement to care, or was it efficiency? We're really stressing the patient engagement piece. Was there, are they enabled to, take some control of their care, or at least include others within their circle of care? And then, of course, operational efficiencies, improved workflows for our enterprise, and, hopefully some aspect of decide, who we should work with, and then ultimately at the end of a project, did it achieve some of the things that we were hoping to do so. So if we go to the next slide, this is to drill down a little bit more in terms of a framework that we would use internally from the decision matrix to better understand, an opportunity and what we can learn from it. So we use what's called a V-safe screening process. So it's fairly straightforward there, and the first is value. Does it provide value? Are there tangible benefits to the organization achieved? What kind of return on investment? And that's not necessarily just from a dollar to dollar value, but are there other achievements or efficiencies derived from said implementation? And then any contribution to current business, imperatives. Does it rely less on, some manual process? Does it rely less on, that sort of, or does it, break down every month? And it's something that, IT needs to look at continuously, that, that they're now sort of removed out of the equation, for instance. Secondly is the S, or the suitability. Are they consistent with, HHS's transformation agenda and, our current situation? Of course, currently we're dealing with the challenges of the COVID pandemic. As, a large regional hospital, we definitely are operating 2 COVID units within, 2 of our hospital sites. There definitely are some, outbreaks in sort of separated into specific departments and wards at the current time, but it is something we're continuously working towards and trying to mitigate and manage. And then of course, we're also working very heavily, and a lot of resources are being deployed towards vaccine, actually giving the vaccine, but then also tracking and sort of the wait list and managing, that kind of triage process. So, those are just some of the current situations now. There'll be others. The other, I think, big, situation we're dealing with right now is, again, that implementation of our health information system, which will have, which will present some challenges. That we'll just have to work around. So thirdly is, whether the solution or whether we're screening it, is it acceptable? Is there support from the stakeholders? And I don't know if we've talked much about this, but, there's certainly going to be resistance from, perhaps patients, resistance from clinicians that have been, perhaps doing something differently, a certain way, or that they're used to, and you're sort of disrupting that process. Is there a resistance within the organization from more of like an administrative, or not an administrative, but like a implementation perspective? Doesn't make sense, or it's too difficult, it's too costly, or, there's going to be resistance from sort of all different angles that need to be, sort of managed and mitigated. And so from an acceptance level, that's something we very much, keep in mind. I've had, studies sort of come to a halt because, the department, or, certain people on, let's say, the biomedical side of things within the organization have just deemed that, this medical device isn't appropriate or safe enough or whatever it is to come in for, a study, when you think like all the other pieces have been sort of put in place, and we have, approvals, we have a clinical champion, we have, good recruitment numbers, all of that. But, we really have to consider all of the stakeholders involved and how acceptable this sort of study undertaking will be. And again, that's, important in terms of just engaging all the stakeholders, all the appropriate stakeholders in part of that decision process. Fourthly, there's considerations around the feasibility. So, was there sufficient resources? Adam touched, about on that certainly in his presentation in terms of, personnel support, resources around other stakeholders or departments within the organization that need to be involved. Let's say if it's an implementation or needing, the interoperability of a digital health solution into, our EMRs. And then of course, feasibility from a budget perspective as well. Where all the consenting process, for instance, like who does that? When is that appropriate to do, to interact with the patient or their family members to say, would you like to engage in this type of study? Going through sort of the consent process, there's just many funding sort of budget considerations when it comes to implementing a study, and I'll talk a little bit about funding, shortly. And then lastly, enduring. So that's, again, touching upon the sustainability. Does it deliver value in the short and long term? What kind of value are we talking? Is it incremental? Is it sort of more holistic? And does it, sort of survive the rigors of time? So that's just a little bit of the process that we work through in terms of a framework, just when we're deciding on, what sort of engagements to take on. Okay, and then a little bit about funding. And I really pulled this out because I believe that, there are three critical pieces to a successful study. And we sort of, continually have said this, but firstly, that clinical champion, the person who really is engaged and involved and wants the study to be successful, is really interested in, using that innovation, applying it in sort of the appropriate clinical setting to help, seek clinical benefit. So having that, having that person involved or persons involved, I think is critically important. Of course, an innovation that actually addresses a true problem and not just a workaround or, whatever the case, and the true problem that hopefully is transferable to, other institutions and other organizations. And then thirdly, for me, is the funding piece. And that's, I just really want to stress that adequate funding is really crucial to support your research to commercialization journey. Clinical and research champions, will require funds, and it's not really just funds on their time, but it's really to be able to spend the time on, this research project. And then assigning, their staff or hiring new staff in terms of research assistants and coordinators or postdoctoral fellows or whatever it is, and their salaries to dedicate to your project. And that would be paramount to your success. As Adam had said, they're worth their weight in gold. And there are a lot of researchers and PIs do have their preferences in terms of research staff. And I think making sure that you have the right people engaged is really paramount to your success. And then, of course, like Adam touched upon, there is definitely, overhead, lab-related costs, other sort of materials, diagnostic time, whatever it is that need to be factored in. And then lastly, institutions often do require funds to be able to implement, your solution. Or enable access connectivity. And that's again more related for digital health solutions where our HITS or IT team often do require, they will invoice research administration, and we will hopefully be able to pass those costs onto the study team when it comes to working on workarounds or being able to enable access for devices or connectivity or Wi-Fi or all of those sort of technical nuances that are critical to the project. So having these initial conversations is really important. And when we're talking about trying to secure funding, maybe from some external sources, so it's not just directly from the company. You might be able to sort of build those into some budgets and secure some funding for those types of activities. So I think it was, I can't remember who, I think it was Finn who had asked about finances. So our office handles, research finances and accounts and all that type of transactional nature. But, I certainly can help with trying to find funding sources that can help to at least fund, partially some of that support outside of, sort of traditional research funds that we have in Canada. So, that's, if you look at the bottom right, research funding is, our Tri-Council agencies. So that's, NSERC or CIHR or SHIRC funds, our typical sort of pools of money that our researchers will apply to. It's always investigator initiated. And they might, be able to leverage some of those funds to work on a collaboration project with you. There's other sort of government agencies, that we have, good relationships with that might offer grants or other opportunities as well. And then I think, if you look on sort of the right side of this sort of, chart that I've created, there's other, accelerators, incubators within Ontario, within Canada that help to support commercialization activities that you can tap into. So, for instance, Alex runs the Synapse through Innovation Factory. He runs the Synapse Life Science Competition. That's something, that you can leverage to use the funds for, a study, perhaps. There's different regional innovation centers across Canada and across Ontario. Innovation Factory being the one, local to Hamilton, that offer different types of grants, depending, again, all different scopes often. There's the biomedical zone, in Toronto, they might have competitions and things like that as well. And then furthermore, there's, other economic development organizations like the Ontario Centres of Innovation, or, we work with grants that are funded through the Ontario Bioscience Innovation Organization. Again, they have, a portfolio of companies and some funding programs to help support these sort of acceleration activities. Ontario Genomics, if that's relevant to, your type of solution. Export Development Canada is sometimes a good organization to tap into. The National Research Council as well helps support some of these activities. And then lately, and my understanding is that some of their grants are available to international companies, but Innovation Solutions Canada has run a number of different competitions through, different departments. We recently, started a trial funded by the Department of Defense and their Innovation for Defense Excellence and Security around a COVID trial, with a medical device company. The Department of Defense also seems to put out a number of competitions lately where it comes to, sort of military rated technologies, whether it's, sort of secure, like a secure transport device that I heard someone mention, earlier this morning, or, those types of innovations can have, sort of an angle when it comes to, emergency deployment and that type of activity. So I think there's different opportunities out there. And even, actually the newest one that I've seen is that Innovation Solutions Canada is offering to fund up to $550,000 for funding of prototypes that are in pre-commercialization status, as long as you're about a TRL or a technology readiness level of about 7 to 9. And it's, open to a variety of different settings, obviously, very much relevant, for health as well. So, I'm sort of sending this out to a number of innovators that I work with that perhaps are are stalled a little bit in terms of securing that funding to work with us. And so it's just sort of an iterative process that I work with these innovators to say, you know, do you want to look into this? And HHS, again, is very open to supporting applications, you know, providing letters of support if required, you know, all of those types of activities to help companies. And once we, you know, deem that we have all the right pieces in place to work together and collaborate. And then we can go into the next slide. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think that was all just to show you a little bit about the considerations that we have to keep in mind when we're evaluating, you know, partners, because again, there are only so many hours in a day. There's only so much bandwidth and capacity within our organization as well to take these things on. We want to make sure that we're trying to generate, you know, as much value as possible. And that sort of leads me to an example that and a project that we took on. This was funded by a number of different sources, both, you know, through FedDev, so our Federal Economic Development Agency in Southern Ontario. It was also funded through OCE, as I mentioned before, the Ontario Centres of Excellence, who've recently rebranded. And this was something that we worked with our industry partner, and they're called mHealth Solutions. So I'll go into that a little bit and describe that for you guys. So what So I'll do a little bit of introduction about what, you know, what sort of we worked on. TAVI or TAVR is a transcatheter aortic valve replacement. These type of procedures are, you know, quite common as it is, and quite sought after, as it is a minimally invasive procedure, which helps to replace a damaged or narrowed heart valve, which fails to open properly, which we term an aortic stenosis. And this is done in a minimally invasive way through through development technology, with a small incision in the groin. A catheter is inserted through that, through that process, and then the team threads a replacement valve through the catheter to implant into the heart to replace that damaged valve. So TAVR surgeries occur annually at the rate of about 1,000 in Ontario, 2,500 within our country, and about 150,000 worldwide, and certainly growing at a rate of about 40% and upwards, you know, every year. So they're certainly, you know, on the rise. You know, and for a number of factors, we have an increasingly aging, you know, population, and it is a relatively safe and minimally invasive technique, as opposed to, you know, having open heart surgery. And it's really helped to identify high-risk patients who are, you know, and really help to provide them with, you know, an alternative who are not eligible for you know, more invasive surgery. And typically, post TAVR replacement, patients would be monitored using telemetry beds for an average about 3 to 9 days. So mHealth Solutions had developed a solution that and a technology and a platform that they felt would help to monitor and triage patients that were eligible for TAVR procedures. And, you know, this study was to assess the feasibility, benefits, and cost effectiveness of using the solution of routine loop monitoring pre and post TAVI. So it's a bit of a medical device and a digital health solution. So if we go to the next slide, please. So, you know, our hospital is really working towards trying to move patients from, you know, the hospital, out of the hospital into the home. And so I think one of the main goals of and why this was really, you know, interesting to us was the investigating whether a decrease in length of stay post procedure could lead to, you know, improved patient satisfaction and quality of life without compromising, of course, you know, their clinical safety. And mHealth Solutions, you know, had this saw the need and came up with this innovative mobile cardiac diagnostic service, a technology and a model that was disruptive through a more compact Holter monitor. So essentially, as you can see in the photo there, that's sort of the monitor. It's about the size of, a smartphone. They call it like a pocket ECG, and it's, easy to use, lightweight and portable, and designed to make the process as simple and effective as possible. So, it's able to, through connectivity of like a chest band that patients would wear, they would track, and monitor heart rhythm and rate to be able to give, best possible data. Holter, testing has come a long way from, really cumbersome, bulky devices to something that's quite sleek and easy to use. And so, this collaboration was an investigation to see whether we could use this technology, virtual technology, to detect cardiac arrhythmias pre and post TAVR in real time, and then be able to report these type of findings to the clinician. So if we go to the next slide, a little bit about sort of that disruptive model and workflow that I spoke about. With your usual TAVR surgery, which is kind of that first arrow there, you would, have, a stenosis or, detection of that narrowing of the heart valve of that artery diagnosed. Patients would be sort of triaged and assessed for, surgery. They would perhaps, be a good candidate, have the TAVR surgery, and then be monitored post-surgery within the hospital for about, on average of about 5 or so days. Once, the clinician and the EP team were confident enough that the surgery was successful, the patient would be discharged and then, sent home to recover, essentially. However, in that workflow, there's not any further monitoring of any cardiac events, for instance, and perhaps, there could be sort of secondary issues that come up after the surgery. In our proposed workflow with mHealth Solutions, the idea is that, a candidate is diagnosed with the stenosis. They're identified as a good candidate for the TAVR surgery. They are provided with the mCards device prior to surgery. They are requested to wear this, as this patient in our little pamphlet has done. So they're provided with a kit, essentially, that they're that's sent directly to their home with instructions, and they can check in with nursing staff if there's any questions or things like that as well. And they're taught how to do it when they first go to the clinic. And so they wear the device. They're instructed to wear the device for about 2 weeks to continuously monitor their heart rhythm prior to their surgery. And then, they have their TAVR surgery. And because there is the confidence and that baseline data as well from prior to the surgery, they're able to wear that device. They continue to wear the device for another 2 weeks after surgery. The beauty of it is that most patients can be discharged from the hospital within about 24 hours. So there's really a significant reduction in just the length of stay in the hospital. I think a lot of, because this is a more elderly population as well, there's definitely sort of that comfort and satisfaction preference, to continue recovering at home, sort of in the comfort and stability, right, of their own home and that convenience as well. So I think that was sort of the proposed workflow that we that we suggested for this project. And so just as a side note, this sort of pamphlet was something that we created in collaboration with our public relations and communications team for a site visit and an event that we were hosting as well. So with the decreased length of stay, there definitely was increased satisfaction, reduced complications, reduced readmissions to the ER. Just if there was sort of abnormal heart rhythms or just any sort of cardiac event, the continuous monitoring helped give patients, I guess, the confidence to know that they were being monitored, but also there was that direct interaction where the second there was, an abnormal heart rhythm, their cardiologist, their electrophysiology team would be notified immediately through mHealth Solutions platform. And then they would immediately receive a call, the patient would receive a call from, their appropriate care team to discuss, what are next steps, do I want to see you at your next clinic visit, or is it serious enough, perhaps you should visit an ED, but there is that continuous touch point that I think, really significantly changed the way that patients went through this process. So all in all, I'll go into a little bit of detail in terms of the next slide about what sort of stakeholders and what was needed and how, who needed to be engaged, I think, at this point. And again, as that point person, I might be the first point of contact to say, okay, here's a clinical champion, or like, let's talk to, our IT team to gauge, the appropriateness of the solution. So I think this was just, if you go to the next slide, please, a sense of who the stakeholders were and who needed to be involved to be able to successfully execute on, this type of project. So, there definitely were a number of external stakeholders, some of the funders, as I mentioned, Ontario Centres of Excellence, FedDev, the Federal Economic Agency, Sunnybrook, the Research Institute was brought on as part of the requirement of the grant to conduct an economic analysis, which was, incredibly important in terms of, what was the value generated from, really changing this proposed workflow and utilizing this type of technology. And then the team had also leveraged the capabilities and expertise of Mohawk College and the Medic team, which is sort of like their manufacturing and data science expertise there. And then in terms of internal stakeholders, and this is just within HHS, there were definitely researchers and clinicians from our Population Health Research Institute, of course, HITS, so our Health Information Technology Services, and then more from a clinical perspective, there was the pacemaker clinic team, the heart investigation unit, electrophysiology clinicians, of course, the coronary care unit, and some of the cardio and vascular folks within intensive care. And then within sort of the practitioners, there was the research staff, the principal investigators, nurses, nurse practitioners, and clinical fellows. And then from the administrative perspective, research finance, of course, had to be involved to sort of manage the research funds in the trial. My team, of course, at research administration, amongst others, and contracts and compliance and others. Our quality and assurance department, we have like a CQI, continuous and quality improvement department. Integrated decision support was incredibly helpful. They have a platform that helps you to sort of see a longitudinal view of patient visits. So they helped provide some data in terms of some of the patients that were involved in the trial and sort of their touch points pre and post surgery and where there are sort of differences and learnings because of the use of the continuous monitoring device. And then we also have a patient experience team at HHS, and they're sort of the frontline people that you would go to in terms of like patient feedback and satisfaction. And again, we wanted to make sure that we had some patients involved on the team as we're designing the trial to say, does this sound like it would work for you? Would you wear the device? Or does what are your thoughts about technology and et cetera. So it really required a fulsome team and a incredible amount of stakeholders to launch this type of project. And so if I move to the next slide, I just want to talk a little bit about how the results of the study in the context of our decision matrix that I had spoken a little bit about earlier. So, from a clinical outcome perspective, of course, we saw a reduction in rehospitalization rates. We saw, 85% compliance with wearing the remote monitoring device. I think what was really important was that streamlined triage of cardiac events for, a timely intervention, being able to, just avoid the ED because the patient had just, didn't know what to do and didn't know where else to go, right? They had someone they could turn to who knew their case, who could, sort of study the results, study the arrhythmia or, whatever symptoms they were feeling, and be able to offer appropriate, intervention based on what they saw, based on real data, right, from their heart rhythms. When it comes to sort of a patient engagement aspect, 98% of patients reported a positive and supported experience from this study. And again, as part of your protocol, you might have patient satisfaction surveys implemented at particular frequencies. Those are all sort of important components, again, when you're trying to build that body of evidence. 92% of patients were confident with the care that was provided. They really appreciated that shorter turnaround time within the hospital, and the confidence to know that they were still being monitored, but just being able to do so in the comfort and safety of their own home. And then moving on to operational efficiencies, we very clearly saw a significant reduction in the average length of stay. So it was reported for the number of patients that went through the trial, there was an average of about 1.9 days spent in the hospital after the surgery, compared to 5 or more days through the typical workflow. There were even, with the monitoring, before and after surgery, there was actually, ability for some challenges that had come up, and being able to circumvent that. So there were some conduction issues that were detected that allowed, for some patients to be identified as, a good candidate for requiring a pacemaker, for instance, which, allowed the care team to plan for such things, as opposed to just kind of, going in there and then realizing that, that was the case, and then having to be, reactive in terms of implementing, other sort of interventions. So, it allowed for more of a planned fashion for, sort of allowing the appropriate type of care. There were 0 unplanned ED visits that were related to cardiac events through the trial, which was, fantastic. And in terms of efficiency, the strong clinical advocates really helped to drive adoption of this innovation. This was, one of our greater success stories, I would say, where it has now been embedded into this process, and workflow has been embedded into HHS's EMR system, and it has received an OHIP, which is our Ontario Health, entity. It has been awarded a billing code, and so this is something now that physicians can just order directly for their patients to say, okay, I want them, they're a good candidate for TAVR surgery. I want them to have this remote monitoring, and then they sort of just have that billed directly, and the kit will be sent with the Holter monitor directly to their home for them to sort of prep for that survey. For that surgery. And then, this has been sort of a leading initiative. So, there are provincial leaders in remote monitoring that have now shown interest in wanting to adopt this, and other Ontario TAVI centers that are looking to follow with this implementation, and changing sort of their workflows. And again, this was really backed by an organization called Core Health, and that's, you know, sort of one of our principal investigators is a big champion, and you know, sits on the board of a number of these sort of cardiac agencies. And so, you know, I think having Core Health on board, who sort of is able to see sort of more of a provincial lens on these types of surgeries, really saw the impact of, you know, this project and this study, and was able to sort of take that and use sort of the learnings and the data generated to push for something like that. Anyway, okay, so moving on to I think my last few slides. You know, that's not to say that the study went off with a hitch, beautiful results, got, you know, even a no-hit billing code is, you know, put into the workflow, and it went off, you know, perfectly. There are certainly a lot of lessons that we learned and some pitfalls that we, you know, hope to mitigate, you know, as we continue to do this. So, you know, I really want to stress the point that adoption of technology will always require the support from our HITS team, and to approach them early on, as I mentioned, you know, sort of in our Q&A. That consultation is, you know, really important for them to understand what they need to undertake, how feasible and reasonable it is, and then do they have the bandwidth to go about doing that, right? So, you know, I think that's something we're really taking the time to do as an early step. Again, you know, the coordination of different departments, you know, perhaps like some studies might involve multiple sites, you know, for recruitment numbers, or for use of, you know, different clinical champions to, you know, to kind of come together. So that coordination is incredibly important. The early engagement of, you know, stakeholders is critical. Otherwise, again, there's just, it can just amount to, you know, too much resistance and again, the proactive management of, you know, any sort of hurdles or challenges that come the way. And of course, you know, just budgeting for, you know, time and the finances needed to support such trials as well. And then I just want to put it out there that, you know, procurement is never guaranteed, even though you're embarking on, you know, some sort of collaboration or pilot trial or evaluation study with, you know, any healthcare delivery organization. Yeah, and then, you know, Alex and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrea. I think just kind of being conscious of time, what we'll do is we'll pivot into, so you and I guess will pivot into kind of this next section. I think picking up on that thematic point that you just ended on, and then happy to open up for any final Q&A for those who have it. We'll just we'll say once again, we're recording this, so certainly those who want to kind of take a closer look at some of the things that Andrea said, or look at the slides, we'll make those available to you. So on the procurement point, Andrew, do you want to just kind of maybe you can tee off these first two slides, and then I'll take the second two, and then we can see if there's any questions around procurement or questions more generally about some of the topics we've covered today. So over to you.
Sure, happy to. And so, you know, I do want to touch a little bit about procurement, and just have you sort of have a basic understanding of, you know, some of the terms and some of the parameters that we have to work within as a public organization. So all procurement must comply with the broader Public Sector Act, Accountability Act, and then associated directives, of which there are 5. The one directive that might be most important to you would be the BPS procurement directive, and that provides sort of procurement you know, activities for a BPS organization, and again with the goal to, you know, improve accountability and transparency, and of course to maximize value for their organizations with the use of their public funds. So, you know, why this is important, it was to ensure that all goods and services are acquired through a process that is open, fair, transparent, and to ensure that again, there is, we're maximizing the value that's received from use of its funds, for as long as the total life cycle, as possible. So there is a collaborative procurement process, and that can be facilitated through purchasing, through the collaboration of these multiple organizations. So they can be called buying groups, group purchasing organizations, and shared service organizations. The idea is that they're leveraging the buying power by aggregating the total spend with other organizations. It helps to standardize the process by streamlining through one centralized buying organization. So, I'll talk a little bit about being a vendor of record, for instance, or being, pre-qualifying as a supplier. So, you've kind of gone through that process, perhaps, with, the one buying organization. There is sort of the process and the contractual obligations in place, and then other organizations can piggyback on that and avoid having to go through the whole process of negotiating and contracting. And so that's the idea, is to minimize risk, improve process controls, and generate savings and efficiencies for all of the collective partners. And then I think I'll move on to the next slide. So often, we're talking about competitive procurements. And so there are certain thresholds, dollar thresholds around that. So where there's an open process, for total procurement values, and that's over the life of a contract, of a total contract. If it's over the value of $100,000 or more, an open competitive process is definitely required and mandated. If there are smaller dollar values, there are ways to go about it in less of an open process. But again, that is entirely dependent on the comfort level and appropriateness of each buying organization or within each organization, within a particular organization. So with HHS, we do have our own procurement department and team. They are involved in every discussion, and we largely defer to them when it comes to these types of conversations. Because we are such a large hospital, we can essentially buy at the scale. I don't want to say about everything, but on certain things at the scale of a group purchasing organization. And so there may be things that Mohawk MedBuy or other shared service organizations might do for us from, I know of some like disposables and things like that we use their contracts on, but often HHS would tend to prefer to conduct their own procurement discussions. And then I have a note about Jagger, which is the electronic tendering system that's used by the province of Ontario to make its procurement opportunities available. There's also other electronic tendering systems, such as Bid and Go and Merx, which are all available online. So you can see any sort of open tenders or bids that are available. And that's not just limited to health, it's like within, all of Ontario. So it might be for forestry, services or transport or whatever it is. So it's all on sort of one system and should be all posted there. And Alex, if you want to take the next slide.
Sure. Thank you, Andrea. So I'm going to just procurement in the end, the ability to find a customer or paying customers. I mean, that is the goal of a private company. We understand that, and the hospitals also understand that. And hospitals don't build their own. They don't build the medical devices and the tools and the supplies and the digital applications that they end up using, at least for the most part. And so they also understand that procurement is an important part of the process. in the United States, hospitals are private sector enterprises and entities themselves, and so therefore they are often engaged in, they have more latitude and are often engaged in being able to purchase lots of products for their own clinicians, and they often do that in order to be able to differentiate themselves from other hospitals operating in the same geographic area. In Canada, it's a little bit different. Like Norway, it's, we have a single public payer, and so therefore there is a greater emphasis on ensuring equity, transparency, and efficiency in the procurement of products. When purchasing large numbers of kind of disposable, simple products, whether it be syringes or even hospital beds, there is that is often where those large group sort of bulk purchases are done through the shared service organizations that Andrea mentioned. But for that first customer acquisition, to be able to demonstrate that your product has market traction, this is where those innovation procurement kind of capacity that each individual hospital has can become a lot more relevant. And so I think that for many of you, that first customer acquisition, especially in a new market, is going to be really important. And I would say that a big note there is that for that innovative procurement, oftentimes it's really a demand-driven process, by which that I mean that someone within the hospital has identified a need and has articulated a need and then has put out a procurement for a solution. If you're bringing a solution to market that is novel, this is where having that clinical champion and having that relationship forged through a trial, through a pilot, through a product evaluation becomes really important, because it is through the demonstration of the value of the product that you can spark kind of the RFP and the procurement process and the search for the solution, which after your pilot may put you in the best position to win the contract. That said, so those are just some things just to think about when thinking about procurement, at least in a Canadian context. That said, there are a lot of different pathways in. Working directly with a hospital is an important pathway. I've listed a couple of other organizations that operate in Ontario that, just to give you a bit of a sense of a flavor of how you might be able to access markets. The first one is the Can Health Network, which is an integrated marketplace, which is run by a group of hospitals who are undertaking commercialization and product assessment engagements with private sector companies in order to be able to surface novel innovation and technology. And then the idea is that if it works in one hospital, that hospital, if you've gone through this program, will then communicate the success to multiple other hospitals in Ontario, thereby increasing the likelihood that your technology will be procured. The National Research Council, which is the next one, they fund very directed assisted programs to solve critical questions, outstanding questions that are in need of innovative solutions. So for example, they have one which is called the COVID-19 Challenge Program. So if your solution matches up with that, for example, the gauze that was mentioned, the infectious gauze that was for COVID patients, that might be a case where NRC is able to fund that effort and also kind of help kickstart procurement. Another provincial agency called OCI runs entrepreneurship programs that provide funding and support and connections to hospital partners to sort of drive procurement. The final three are private sector actors who are operating in the market. Mohawk Medbuy is one of the larger group purchasing organizations that Andrea mentioned. They procure products for a network of hundreds of hospitals and care facilities in Ontario. Becoming a vendor of record for them is something that all companies should aspire to. Though I would caution that because of the number of organizations that they serve, they expect a certain level of market penetration, I think, before they bring you in as a kind of a reliable partner. Shoppers Drug Mart is a national pharmaceutical chain that serves every region in Canada, and they are, especially for direct-to-consumer products, they're an important potential partner to be able to provide visibility and shelf space for innovative products. But again, there's an issue about kind of market size. MMSI MacArthur Medical Sales is an example of a medical supplier. There are several which operate across Canada and are smaller than Mohawk Medbuy, and they generally they're a little bit more receptive because they generally have smaller networks of hospitals or care facilities that they supply, and that might be being able to convince them of the value of your product might lead them to sort of bring your product into their portfolio, and then you can leverage their networks in order to be able to kind of find potential customers. So I just wanted to just sort of note that there are a couple of different ways to crack this nut, but oftentimes, especially as you're doing your first sale, being able to leverage a pilot or a product evaluation program with a hospital can often establish that initial demand side kind of for your technology and allow you to gain some credibility in the marketplace. With that, I think we're done sort of the bulk of our, well, we're done all the sort of the formal presentations, and I do want to thank everyone for your time and patience. It's certainly been a long session, and I wanted to open up the floor to any questions. Before I do so, I do want to just Lori has reminded me that there for companies that are going to participate in the one-on-ones with Andrea and I, we're going to be sending out a doodle poll just to ask you some dates and times that work for you in the coming weeks. And as well, just wanted to let you know that we'll be, again, sharing these slides with you. In advance of those conversations with Andrea and I would encourage you just to think about some of the themes that we're covering, and also to think about sort of, again, that diagram that Andrea showed, the operational effectiveness, the clinical outcomes, how does your product, how does that value proposition fit with kind of what the hospital is looking for. And then I also wanted to just say there's some additional resources which you can look at your own time, that may be useful and sort of supplement some of the topics that we covered. So with that, are there any final questions or considerations? Oh, it sounds like there might be someone.
Maybe me.
Oh yeah, hi, Lori.
Lori. Hi. So I think that was a great overview, and I know there's a lot of information here for everyone to digest, and I it's going to be great when we get the presentation and there's time to go through all the number of topics. Maybe just one question moving forward to that next step to both you, Alex, and to you, Andrea, for these one-on-ones. So as you know, most of these companies don't have any sales yet in Canada. Most of them have already had sales in the Nordics. How would you recommend outside of going through the screening process slide and your missions, understanding more about what resonates? What would be some ways that you would recommend that they prepare? What would you like to see in their pitch to you, in their discussion to you?
Andrew, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think it's great that you have some sales and some penetration in other markets. So I would love to see some of that data, or some of the learnings generated. What's sort of the scale and scope of the penetration? What type of, is it in a community setting? Is it in a research hospital, academic hospital? Any of those details I think would be really helpful to help us sort of determine alignment and appropriateness. And it's wonderful that you have sort of that already that growing body of evidence, and it certainly is already a step ahead compared to a number of most companies that we speak with. In fact, so I think that certainly gives you kind of a step up.
So I would agree with that. And I would also say that one thing that's very helpful is if you are, and this is actually good for any of the companies, is that if you're able to articulate where your gaps or where your pain points are, what are the questions that you're hoping to answer, that's really helpful. If it is simply, look, we have sales in Norway and we need to find partners to do sales and break into the North American market. That's a question that can be answered, but which leads to a different solution set than we're having, we need to overcome kind of system integration issues with Epic, or so I think that understanding what your problems are and being able to articulate them is helpful. Now I know that it looked like that Bjorn had a question. So Bjorn, over to you.
Yes, please. I was.
Oh, Bjorn, I think we might have lost you. Uh-oh.
Oh. Yeah, I can't hear him.
Maybe he can type it.
Uh-oh. Yeah, Bjorn, we can see that you're speaking, but it looks like, are you able to type it down quickly? Unfortunately, no.
Worst case, maybe he can email it on if he can't even type it in.
Oh, that's so weird.
Okay. While Bjorn is typing his question, are there any? Yes, Bjorn, we can see you and we can see you talking, but we cannot hear you. We heard you just initially, and then you cut out. If there are, are there any other questions? Okay. So we'll wait for Bjorn. Okay. So it looks like Bjorn's going to save his question for the one-on-one session. That's absolutely fine. Anything else? Otherwise, what I will do is we'll end this. And again, thank everyone, and looking forward to being able to speak to you on the one-on-ones. And in the meantime, everyone can now enjoy a world in which we have a President Biden, because it's 12:09. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, for participating, and we will see you during the one-on-one sessions.